Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I stare out of the large floor-to-ceiling windows of my Seattle apartment block, overlooking a bustling, busy street, thronging with vibrant activity, not too far away from the Space Needle. I'm very fortunate to be living in a prime location of Seattle, with such fabulous transfixing views over the city, where I can watch the buzzing swarms of people walking up and down the street, some in a hurry, others much more relaxed in their approach. I can see a stylish-looking woman, elegantly attired in loose cotton pants and a very smart blue woolen sweater. She's walking her 3 dogs, a very large white poodle that looks magnificent as her hair has been styled by a top Seattle groomer. And even the dog walks with a swagger, as if she knows she looks good. Then there's a little Boston Terrier, along with a Yorkshire Terrier who has also been neatly manicured. I happen to know the woman personally. Well, not that well, but I've bumped into her a few times in the apartment lift. I think she lives here on the 3rd floor, as sometimes I've heard the Yorkshire Terrier yakking quite loudly. He can make quite a noise sometimes for one so small, but I don't mind at all. I'm mollified and consoled by the noises of life. It seems comforting watching her taking her dogs for a walk. It makes my life seem a lot more normal. There's a street vendor frying chicken on one of the grills, calling out, "Best chicken kebabs in Seattle or your money back." He's always industriously making chicken kebabs, and at this hour of the morning a couple of people are actually buying them from him. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, for goodness sake. Who eats chicken kebabs at this time of the morning? But nothing surprises me. This is Seattle, and some people have quirky habits here. One thing that never transmutates here is the quintessential love of coffee. There's a prepossessing, rather quirky coffee shop in my field of vision, and a long line of people gathered to pick up their regular morning portable coffees in the familiar pale brown plastic coffee containers with their lids. I see people walking away with their coffees clasped in their hands, with a steaming mist rising up in the air, and brown paper bags clutched in their hands. I happen to know that their pecan nut pie donuts are the best in the entire world. The owner let me into a secret once, telling me there's potato flour in those donuts. They're the lightest donuts I've ever tasted. I observe the people curiously making their weary way to work every morning. I see the same people day after day, with the same familiar faces plodding down the same charcoal ribbon of pavement. This is a glimpse or coup d'oeil of real life that I've been sheltered from for so long. Sometimes I watch people with my binoculars to get a close-up personal look at them. I feel almost as if I know them, as I see them every single day. Well, almost. It's not that I'm a complete weirdo, getting my kicks from watching other people's activities. But then again, maybe I am. But it certainly makes my rather monotonous monochromatic day far less beige, pedestrian and nondescript, rather like a splash of bright red colour on a black and white canvas. I feel like an outsider, cocooned in a glass bubble or cage, watching the world go by, with the repetitive jejune drudgery of my daily monotonic, somewhat ponderous routines, whistling the same laborious tunes day after day. How I wish things could be different for me, and that I could be part of this flamboyant rich tapestry. Instead, I'm like the frayed piece of wool that went astray and was dismissed by the weaver, whom overlooked me as being an intrinsic thread that did not deserve to be part of this fabulously engaging tapestry called life. So she left my thread lying caught up in her sewing basket, abandoned, estranged, forsaken, and forgotten. I can see a woman interacting with her friend on the street corner in earnest conversation. I've seen them many times before. They're very good friends most of the time. Today they're talking garrulously together. They seem close. But this morning one woman looks affronted. She storms away belligerently, as if her friend's words have offended her. I wonder what she said to cause so much upset. The other woman stands her ground, shaking her head indignantly. She straggles behind her friend, who has left her trailing far behind, as she takes purposeful, fast strides. I reflect sorrowfully to myself that it was not long ago it was me dashing down that same road, elegantly clad in a very smart black jacket and pants that elegantly flared at the bottom, with a crocodile-skin briefcase in my hand. It was me standing among the queue in the coffee shop to pick up my morning latte and my favourite pecan nut pie donut. I'd looked every part the high-flying business executive, and nothing was ever going to stop me from reaching the stars. I was ambitious, resolutely determined to succeed. At the time I was placed in charge of running an illustrious high-profile French cosmetic house here in Seattle, with regular trips to the mother company in Paris, where I would be wined and dined by my French hosts at fabulous restaurants along the Champs-Élysées. It certainly was a dream job. I worked so hard to acquire it. I had applied blood, sweat and tears in my desire to succeed, without stepping on anyone's toes in the process, as ethics is incredibly important to me in every regard. Furthermore, I was passionate about the products we were promoting, as some of the treatments were literally cutting edge, with very sophisticated delivery systems, or what we call in the cosmetic industry excipients, which are easily absorbed by the skin. But as soon as I had landed this incredible position, 6 months later my whole life had come crashing down on me like a pack of cards. In the beginning it had been so ingeniously subtle, rather like a cheetah stealthily ambling forward in the undergrowth towards its oblivious prey. Moreover, it had crept on me overnight. At first I had found myself overwhelmed with an unfathomable exhaustion, and then slowly but surely I began to suffer from insufferable aches and pains that got considerably worse. I put my fatigued, emotionally drained state down to tiredness and exhaustion. Perhaps I'd been burning the candle at both ends, as I put my heart and soul in my job, so it wasn't so surprising that I was tired, was it? It would seem that even after sufficient rest, I was still far too exhausted to even climb out of bed. Everything became such a monumental struggle, a laborious effort. It was as if I was thrown into the ocean and was fighting to keep my head above water, but gradually becoming weaker and weaker and weaker, so I could barely hold my head above the surface of the water anymore, until slowly and surely I began to sink. At the same time I began to fear the worst for my health, as I instinctively sensed something was terribly wrong with my body. It left me feeling very unsettled. Perhaps I had cancer. I mean, what had the power to literally ransack, plunder my energy like this, engendering every bone in my body to ache? I was only 36 years old, for goodness sake, but I felt as if I was turning 86, for I hobbled around my elegant apartment, rather like an old lady. After a plethora of tests, cancer was thankfully ruled out, but I was informed that I had chronic fatigue syndrome. Some medical professionals don't even diagnose it as a real, authentic condition, but believe me, anyone who has suffered from this condition will gladly affirm that it is very definitely real. There is nothing fictitious about it at all. Naturally, I had to resign from my post as managing director of this cosmetic empire, as I was informed that my illness was unlikely to ever abate. So leaving my job was the hardest, most difficult thing I've ever had to do in my entire life. I watched my dream job plunder down the toilet, along with all my hopes and aspirations for the future, that may never be rekindled. I was to discover that ME is the kind of illness that consumes your life, rather like a ravaging cancer. It hijacks your friendships, extinguishes your social life like the light on the wick at the end of a candle. And very soon it is like life passes you by. Before you know it, you're almost forgotten, estranged, forsaken and abandoned by all your friends and even work colleagues, almost as if you died and no longer exist. It's not personal, of course. People are invariably caught up in their own lives. But I'm not going to lie about it. Being overlooked by your friends definitely hurts. So yes, you could say I was almost a prisoner in my own home. It was a monumental effort to ever leave the apartment, although on rare occasions, when I was having a good day, I'd managed to get out for a breather and go shopping for a couple of hours. But any efforts like this can knock you out so hard, you feel as if you've run a marathon. My older sister Roberta believes that my unfortunate condition is a figment of my own very ingenious, highly inventive imagination, or a convenience I've employed in order to escape the challenges of gainful employment. It is my clever way of ducking out of society at the expense of the taxpayer. That's how she perceives it. She's also angry that my father is paying the monthly rentals on my Seattle apartment, but my parents assure her that if she was the one that was unwell, they'd be doing the very same for her. But she says she doesn't believe that for a moment, and is offended that I've landed on my feet, or in the honey pot, as she puts it. I have naturally assured her that there is nothing sweet about my life these days, but she's not buying it for a moment. She's impervious and incognizant of other people's feelings. She's one of those blunt, brusque people that says exactly what she thinks, and is not prepared to employ any tact or diplomacy in her conversations with others. In truth, she's the kind of person who can tear up her friendships faster than a paper shredder. Ostensibly, she's upset people all her life, ruffling up people's feathers, causing offence wherever she goes, rather like a large industrial bulldozer, demolishing everything in its wake. I remember when I was a little girl, she told our next-door neighbour she was the fattest woman she'd ever seen, and she told my mother's best friend that she stank of mothballs. It's like she's employed no tactful filter in her life to consider the feelings of others that can so easily be hurt. She's unwittingly perplexed as to why she has no friends, why most of her relationships with men don't last 2 minutes. And even my own parents can only take her in small doses before they've had quite enough of her. "I know exactly what's going on here, Evie," she says to me pointedly. "You're afraid of success, are you not? You get this fabulous job running this cosmetic empire. Then it all just goes to seed when the job gets too much for you. So instead of looking like an incompetent non-achiever, like you clearly are, you expediently invented the spurious illness so that you could fallaciously bow out of your job gracefully, with your head held high. I know what this is. You couldn't handle it at the top, could you? You just don't have what it takes to succeed. You haven't got bottle or broom, they call it, like I have. My guess is you fancy mooching around lazily, hanging around this grandiose apartment all day, watching Days of Our Lives on television, and stuffing your face with popcorn. It's all right for some, isn't it? Some of us actually have to work for a living, you know." She says this, her voice sounding decidedly peeved. I can feel my blood boiling at my treacherous sister's scathing comments. There is a part of me that wants to slap her across the face so hard. She has no idea how much I long to be part of the workforce again, how much I miss my prominent position in the cosmetic company. I despise this illness that is sucking the life out of me like a blood-sucking leech. But my sister has no compassion, no empathy. I watch her droning on and on at me as she garrulously natters away, her mouth moving up and down like a silent movie. I know she's saying something derogatory and condescending, but my ears are deaf to her words. I've learnt over the years to switch off Radio Roberta before her words become too cutting, too insufferable. I think my parents sagaciously have learnt to employ similar tactics. It's the only way to survive her acrimonious, scolding verbal assaults, to emerge from one of Roberta's debilitating attacks, incorrupted and unscathed, with your dignity still intact. The best thing to do is to switch off and go blank, which of course means that Roberta thinks no one ever listens to her, and it drives her crazy. Did you hear me, Evie? She snaps angrily, looking at me with round, belligerent eyes. Why is it, sis, you never listen to me? You're as bad as Mum and Dad. They're always drifting off to La-La Land when I'm talking to them. It drives me completely insane. Why doesn't anybody ever listen to me? Maybe it's because you haven't got anything nice to say, I say. Your words are always stinging like a bluebottle jellyfish or a hive of angry hornets. You have no filter, Roberta. That's your problem. You're always upsetting people. Why do you think you have no friends? Why are people so pathetically fragile that they can't hear the truth? What's wrong with them? Well, sis, on the subject of truth, I keep telling you, you need to get your act together. To stop moping around, feeling sorry for yourself all the time. If you ask me, it would do you good to get out of this stuffy apartment. Take a nice fresh walk in the park. She stops for a moment and pauses. I need to ask you a big favour, sis, she says suddenly, as if it occurs to her that it might stand her in good stead if she pressed some nice buttons for a change. Go ahead and ask. If I can help you, you know I'd be glad to, Roberta. Well, I've got a busy few days ahead of me in the offices. We're doing the marketing for a high-profile up-and-coming company. I'm literally run off my feet at the moment, negotiating deals left, right and centre. Stuff is busy, busy, busy. I need to drop Evan off at your apartment every morning at about 6 o'clock sharp. It's the school holidays, you see. I'm far too busy to keep an 8-year-old brat entertained all the time. I thought, you know, with your being in this apartment all day, that he could stay with you during the day. I've got 1,001 things to do at work. Rob cannot help either. His landscaping business is bursting at the seams. It's hectically busy these days. We can't leave Evan on his own all day. I'm sure you appreciate he needs adult supervision all the time. So if you could look after him, I'd be immensely grateful. You'd be doing me an enormous favour. But you live in a lovely farmhouse, Roberta. There's so much for your son to do in nature compared with hanging around his boring aunt all day in an apartment. Haven't you thought of hiring a nanny in the circumstances? My sister scoffs. I can see her oval jawline clenching tightly. Don't be ridiculous. Evan is 8 years old. 8-year-old boys don't need nannies. He's not a baby anymore. He needs a babysitter, and you're perfect for the job. She pauses for a moment and puts her hands on one of her hips in a gesture of defiance, her eyes almost glinting with rage. I know what this is all about, sis. The truth is you're too damn idle to even leave this apartment, too bloody lazy to look after my son. I expected as much from you. I can't believe you got Mum and Dad eating out of your hands. Mind you, they've always been big softies as far as you're concerned. Oh, poor Evie this, poor Evie that. It's so pathetic, really pathetic, and they're lapping it all up like there's no tomorrow. They've rarely bought into your clever, duplicitous charade, hook, line and sinker. But I don't buy it, none of it. You were always the lazy, lackadaisical one growing up. Nothing's changed, has it? You just want to float around this apartment all day like a hot air balloon. You want to sail through life, doing whatever tickles your fancy, while the rest of us pay our taxes to keep you wrapped up in clover, like pigs in blanket. It makes me bloody sick, it really does. Roberta, could you please refrain from using such foul language? Of course I can look after Evan for you, but I do get tired. The pain I experience is really insufferable at times. It might be boring for him hanging around with me all day. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I mean, I'm not in a great position to take him to the zoo or to go off and have a milkshake, unless I'm having a good day. If I'm having a good day, then that's what I will do. But my condition is unpredictable and tumultuous at the best of times, much like the weather. There are no guarantees about anything. My sister's demeanour softens. He'll be absolutely fine. All he needs is a little adult supervision. He's very independent. He has his Xbox with him to keep him busy, his tablet, and then there's a television. He knows how to keep himself entertained, so you've got nothing to worry about on that score. You just need to keep an eye on him between dozing off in your bed all day like a lazy slug. And of course you need to feed him. I'll pick him up at 5:30 every day after work. I could hardly believe I'd agreed to this nonsensical arrangement. I ignored the last jab, lazy slug, directed at me by my sister. Roberta has this masterful toffee-nosed way of contemptuously putting you down and then superciliously manipulating you to do exactly what she wants. But I wasn't doing this favour on her behalf, I told myself. I was doing this for my nephew Evan. I will admit I felt rather worried that Evan was going to get hell of a bored hanging around his uninspiring aunt all day. Because let's not kid, I do have about as much energy as a sloth. Before I retired to bed that night, I set my alarm clock for 10 to 6 in the morning to look presentable for my sister when she dropped off Evan. I couldn't stand the idea of her giving me those haughty, condescending looks. My alarm clock began to ring. I pulled the sheet over my head and groaned. Sitting up slowly, a familiar stabbing pain shot down my back, trailing down my legs. I clenched my teeth tightly, riding the waves of the pain rather like a surfer on a tumultuous breaker. Then I heard the bell of my apartment ringing. Roberta had her hand pressed on the bell and was not letting go of it. It was like a low-pitched siren went blasting through the apartment, and with the dividing walls between each apartment being rather thin, I was certain she was waking up all my immediate neighbours with this god-awful commotion. But of course the disdainful Roberta extends no courtesy or decency towards other people's inconvenience. As in Roberta's narcissistic world, it really is all about her. I tried to get out of bed as quickly as I could, but I was fighting my pain, which failed to accommodate my haste. I was gritting my teeth tightly, consumed by the dull throbs. I reached for my dressing gown and slippers, scuttling quickly towards the front door, at one point feeling as though I was going to pass out from the gnawing pain that consumed every cell in my body. Heaving, I finally clasped the door handle, holding on to the frame for dear life, breathing in heavily. Finally, I plunged the key into the lock and succeed in opening the door. My next-door neighbour had opened his door to the apartment next to mine. He's wearing blue and white pyjamas and looks distinctly peeved. I can't say I blame him. He was telling my sister to stop ringing the bell. She's waking everyone up. "Excuse me, madam. Some people are trying to get asleep around here." My sister stops ringing the bell. She mindfully ignores the man, making a face at him behind his back. Perhaps he can feel it, because I can hear him saying under his breath, "Some people have no bloody manners around here." "Oh, there you are," snaps Roberta. "You took your time getting to the door, sis. Too lazy to get out of bed, were we? Look at you. You look a right state, don't you? Your hair standing up on edge like a hedgehog. You look like you've been dragged through a hedge backwards. I'm sure you looked much the same when you got out of bed this morning, Roberta," I say. "You're early," I say indignantly. "I set my alarm for 10 to 6. It's now 5 to 6. I've only just got out of bed this minute. That's why I look dishevelled. You, on the other hand, look like you've been preening yourself since 4 o'clock this morning." I was unable to resist having a dig. It certainly was true. Roberta was standing in my doorway, looking annoyingly like she'd stepped out of a bandbox. She looked amazing. Her perfect makeup was flawless. There wasn't a hair out of place in her meticulous Lady Diana hairstyle. She looked very elegant and smart in her Prada jacket and black pants, worn with her elegant high-heeled sandals. I could see my sister's eyes passing a disapproving judgment over me, as if I was the raccoon that had been ferreting around in her bin to gather up a few mouldy snacks who she wanted to shoo away at the first opportunity. I can see her chewing the inside of her mouth to bite back some of the nasty jabs she seems to be keeping under her hat for the time being at least. If I were you, sis, I'd get a hairbrush into that tangled heap of a mess you call your hair. You really do look a dreadful sight this morning. Thanks, sis, for the lovely compliment. That's really what I need to hear at this time of the morning. I'll bear it in mind. Now I want you to be a good boy for Aunt Evie, Evan says my sister complacently. She pushes Evan forward into my apartment. "Take your shoes off. You don't want to mess up Aunt Evie's carpet, do you? And don't forget to hang your anorak on the hook there in the hall. You might need it later when it gets cooler. That's a good boy now. Now don't you dare go giving Aunt Evie a hard time. Your aunt gets very tired," she says, kissing her son on the cheeks. Was I mistaken? I was almost certain I saw my nephew flinch when Roberta's lips touched his cheeks. Then when she turned away, my nephew wiped the area with his hands as if he was disgusted by his own mother's kiss. I wasn't certain what to make of that. But then again, maybe boys hated being kissed. Thanks, Evie, she says. You really are a lifesaver. I truly appreciate this. I watch her glancing at the time on her cell phone, scanning through her messages. She stands there like a waxwork statue as she reads all her messages. Oh, that's the office, she says. I better get a move on. I'm running late, very late. I watch her revving up her efficient, slender, finely tuned human engine, dashing down the long flight of steps, wilfully ignoring the lift. She totters down them with the clip-clop of her heels. For a brief moment, I feel the green-eyed monster rearing its ugly head. How I wish I could get up like my sister, embracing the world filled with a zealous, enthusiastic energy, without being overtaken by this god-awful pain all the time, the unrelenting fatigue that renders me unable to function normally in my everyday life, as I am a victim to the dictates of my own body. Over the next few days, Evan begins to relax in my apartment. We begin to develop a firm friendship. He becomes very excited when I suggest we play card games together. He seems bewildered that I make the extra effort to be accommodating to him, to attend to his every need. I begin to get the sense that he's not used to receiving so much personalised attention, which makes me quite sad. I suppose my sister is so caught up in her own world, she doesn't have much time for her son. You mean you'll play with me, Aunt Evie? He asks, looking surprised. No one ever plays with me. Whenever I play board games, I have to become the other player. Does your mum never play games with you, I ask, looking surprised. What about Rob? No, Mum never plays games with me. She says they're silly. She never plays anything with me. And Rob, well, he's never around. I see, I said. Well, let me assure you, Evan, games aren't silly at all. Just take what your mother says with a pinch of salt, will you? Your mother can be rather insensitive and hard-hearted sometimes, but you mustn't let it get you down. Let's just say prudent discretion and tact are not her strong points, shall we? When Evan wins our board game, he becomes ecstatic. It's hard to wipe the cheeky grin off his face. I won, Aunt Evie, he says with delight. I won! Yay! I won! Don't look so incredulous, Evan. You're as bright as a button, very sharp and shrewd. I'm not surprised at all you won. You're a clever boy. Evan looks stunned. Do you really think I'm clever, Aunt Evie? He asks me. Mummy says I'm stupid all the time. At this appalling revelation, I'm visibly upset and disturbed. Stupid? You're not stupid. You're the brightest, most discerning 8-year-old boy I know. I doubt me or your mother were as clever as you are at 8 years old. Evan looks thrilled by my comments, but I feel anger surging through my veins. My sister should never, ever be calling her son stupid. After we finish our board games, I bring in a large tray of chocolate biscuits and some jingling glasses of orange squash filled with Monster Man ice cubes. And I agree to watch some television with my nephew. You mean you're going to watch TV with me, Aunt Evie? He hands me the control, which I pass back to him. You decide what we watch, I say. Evan looks bewildered. You mean I can choose what we watch as well? Of course. Go ahead. Choose something you want to watch. Aunt Evie, you're the best. I thought it would be so boring staying with you, but I really, really like it here. Good, I'm glad, I say. If you must know, Evan, I'm glad you're here as well. I'm thoroughly enjoying your company. It's so fun having you around. Evan loves wildlife, so I'm not surprised he's chosen to watch a safari scene in Africa. Before long, we are both mesmerised and gripped by the extraordinary story. Tears are shed for the old wounded male lion, whom has sired many of the Serengeti's most phenomenal lions, but now his illustrious reign has so sadly come to an end. He had been attacked by 2 male brothers, who had become powerful, tenacious and strong, and had wilfully overtaken the lion pack, by seriously injuring the older male, whom ruefully hobbles away from the scene, badly injured, knowing that his sovereignty as the dominant male is now finally over. He looks so wistfully melancholy as he walks into the wilderness with his long, glorious dark mane swaying in the wind. He knows he's lucky to be alive, for most are not so fortunate and are left to die of their lethal wounds. He's exhausted and fatigued, his mouth dappled by red blood. He lets out a final roar. Then he trudges away to recuperate somewhere, to lick his wounds. The rest of his days will be spent a loner, wandering around the African wilderness solo, unless he's fortunate enough to team up with another old male. Evan is crying after he watches the two splendid-looking large males killing all the young lions in the pack, while the female mothers fight back to protect their young, but to no avail, for they are no match for this powerful duo. "Why did those two horrible male lions have to kill the young baby lions, Auntie Evie? It's cruel." "It's nature," I explain. "You see, they want to mate with the females and procure their own genetic family line. They need to get the young ones out of the way, so that the females will quickly come into season. So while the mothers are nursing the cubs from the previous male, that won't happen. Besides, they don't want any competition around, and the other male cubs, they're a threat." "But it's not fair," pipes Evan. "It's cruel." The tears spill down his face. "Nature can be cruel, Evan," I said. "It's survival of the fittest in the natural world, you see. Good job we don't live like that as humans, or I'd have been eaten a long time ago." I laugh. "You see, in the wild, animals like lions, coyotes, wild dogs, wolves, and even crocodiles always go for the weak animals first. It's how nature works." "So you think if you were a wild animal, Aunt Evie, you would be dead already?" "Absolutely, because I'm physically weak. I'm always in pain. In the natural world, an animal like me wouldn't last 2 minutes. I'd have been eaten a long time ago. It's nature's way of weeding out the sick, elderly and ill. It's a very efficient process that works well." "Mummy says you're making your illness up because you're lazy and you want people to be very sorry for you. She says you want people like her to pay for you to sleep and watch TV all day." "Just ignore your mother, Evan. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She thinks I'm making up my illness, but I'm not. And I'm not lazy. When I'm up and about, I try to keep busy. Your mum's just being very judgmental." "I know you're not making up your illness, Aunt Evie," says Evan. "I see you're in pain in your face sometimes. My mother can be horrible," he admits. "Really horrible. No one likes her. Some of the boys in my class say their mother says my mother's a bitch." "Well, as long as she's not horrible to you, that's all that matters," I tease. For a moment, Evan says nothing. He remains stoically silent. He quickly starts flicking through the television, with the control like an avoidance tactic, almost as if discussing his mother is not a subject he eagerly wants to broach too deeply. His behaviour makes me affirm that my sister's jagged, poisonous tongue has been all too eagerly amply employed with her own son. But am I surprised about this? No, not really. I'm clandestinely concerned that my sister's unbridled tongue could be doing a world of damage to my 8-year-old nephew. "Talk about the devil," I say. "It's your mother." My cell phone that is sitting on the coffee table in the lounge lights up, betraying the name of the caller. I pick up the phone, putting it on speaker so that Evan can hear. I keep it at arm's length, possibly as a defensive measure, just in case the phone begins to spout abuse. "Hello, Evie. It's me, Roberta. How's Evan behaving himself? I hope he's been a good boy. Not too much trouble, is he?" "He's been as good as gold," I say. "We've been having lots of fun together, haven't we, Evan?" "Glad to hear it, sis. Listen, I've got a big favour to ask you. Could Evan please stay overnight at your apartment? I have 1,001 things I need to do. I certainly don't have time to pick him up tonight. It's one of those days when everything gets on top of you. You know how it gets. And Rob is far too busy to lend a helping hand." "Of course. It would be a pleasure to have Evan stay over." "Thanks, sis. You're a real star. I promise you I'll make it up to you." She puts down the receiver and is gone. "You hear that?" I say to Evan. "She wants you to stay overnight here. I hope that's all right with you and you're not upset not to be going home." Evan's face brightens considerably. He oscillates his arms, punching the air in delight. "Yes! Yes, yes, yes! I really like staying with you, Aunt Evie. It's really nice with you. You play games with me. You watch TV and eat with me. At home I'm always on my own, entertaining myself. It gets boring sometimes." "Of course it does if no one's playing with you. Do you get lonely?" I ask. Evan nods. I can see his eyes are glistening, almost as if he's fighting back tears. "But I'd rather hang around on my own than be around my mother, 'cause she can be unkind at times," I say. He nods. And you, Aunt Evie, do you get lonely here in your apartment? I nod. It can get lonely, I admit. Contrary to what your mother believes, I wish I could go out and paint the town red and go off and have a ball. I'd love to see some of my friends and work colleagues again. I miss them dreadfully. I miss my fabulous job in the city. I'm sure their lives are far too busy. They don't think of me any more. I point to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the street. You see the windows over there? That's the one way I feel connected to the outside world. It's my lifeline, so to speak, as odd as it may sound. I sometimes sit there with a coffee. I watch the world go by. Then I don't feel quite so alone anymore. People watching can be very interesting, you know, Evan. But do you ever go out, Aunt Evie? Or am I like Rapunzel, you mean, locked away in an ivory tower, I tease, giving my nephew a tickle on his belly. He bursts out laughing. Don't, Aunt Evie, I'm ticklish. Do you ever go shopping, Aunt Evie? Or do you always get everything delivered? Well, I do go shopping, if I'm having a good day and the pain is manageable, but not for clothes, I say, looking down at my scruffy loose cotton pants and T-shirt that have been well worn, as I practically live in comfortable clothes. There's not much point in going clothes shopping, is there? If I'm stuck here all day, I point out. When I come back from a shopping spree, I'm knocked out, and every muscle in my body is on fire. Now, enough about me. How about I get us some chocolate chip cookies and hot chocolate before we go to bed, and you can sleep in my T-shirt. Have you got a long-sleeve T-shirt, Aunt Evie, that I can wear? Of course. You prefer long sleeves. Evan nods. Evan and I sit together happily, both watching a comedy together, laughing and dunking our chocolate chip cookies into the hot chocolate, so our mouths are filled with an explosion of chocolate. Betty buys, I finally say, as I try to pick myself up off the couch, but I wince as the pain shoots through my spine in throbbing spasms. Evan is quickly at my side. Lean on me, Auntie Evie, he says, his eyes full of concern. Will you go and get me some water and my painkillers, I ask Evan. Evan shoots off to get me a couple of Avril, which I quickly swallow, and once I've taken them, I allow my 8-year-old nephew to help me up. I feel as if I'm a 100-year-old woman. It's later that night that I wake with a start. I notice the curtains in my bedroom are twitching. They're moving vigorously. They're swaying backwards and forwards, in and out, as a heavy wind beats against not only the curtains, but the apartment as well. My window is slightly ajar. It's making a rather annoying rattling sound, and some of the wind is imbuing through the little opening, thrashing across my face with showers of cool air, like a fan on high. I know I need to close that window quickly, before all the china on my dressing table hits the ground and smashes into 1,000 smithereens. It's happened before on a windy night. I can hear things crashing down on the street below. The blustering gusts of wind pick up a vigorous, speedy momentum. It's possibly blasted and blown the contents of the street bin out of their holdall onto the street. I can hear tin cans jangling and clanging as they roll down the charcoal asphalt. I decide that it's the wind that must have woken me up. But the soft silvery moonlight dancing through my bedroom window lights up a small shadowy figure standing at the bottom of my bed. Then I recognise the silhouette. It's my nephew Evan. His face looks so affrighted. His eyes are as wide as an owl's. And to my horror, he's trembling like a jelly. Oh, my word, it's you, Evan. You gave me a scare. Have you had a horrible nightmare or something? Evan shakes his head and trembles. I'm sorry, Aunt Evie. I wet the bed. Please don't be angry with me, he begs. I didn't mean to do it. I'm really, really sorry. Don't be silly, Evan. Why would I be angry about that? You've just had an accident, that's all. It's easily fixed. I tell you what, I'll change your bed sheet, shall I? Why don't you go and run yourself a bath? I'll bring you a brand new T-shirt to wear. How about that? If you like, you can put on some bubbles in the bath to make it all lovely and fluffy. My favourite is the lavender breeze. You just need a tablespoon in the water. You do know how to run a bath, don't you? Of course, Aunt Evie. I'm 8. I can do lots of things. As I put on the washing machine, piling in Evan's bed sheets, I ponder over Evan's feeble, abject reaction to wetting the bed. I couldn't believe how terrified he looked. That is very disturbing. The boy seems almost traumatized, but I guess my sister Roberta possibly blows a fuse with him every time he wets his bed. But more to the point, why is he wetting his bed in the first place? He should have grown out of it by now. Something is clearly upsetting and distressing Evan. But what? I have a sneaking suspicion the blame lies at my sister's door. I'll have to have stiff words with her, I decide. It's one thing for her to be putting an adult down, but humiliating her son at such a young, tender age is likely to cause serious emotional harm to him in the long term. I stand in the doorway of Evan's bedroom, with a cup of hot chocolate in my hands. He doesn't know that I'm standing there watching him, and what I'm seeing is so shocking that I nearly lose control of the hot chocolate that I'm holding in my hands. I discern Evan has a towel wrapped around his middle after his bath. His back is facing away from me. He's putting on his long T-shirt, but his back is covered in large bruises, as if he's been physically beaten up. I quickly turn away, gasping at the horrific sight. What do I do about that, I think? Once Evan has his T-shirt on, I act nonchalant, as if I've only just come into his bedroom. I know my nephew would be mortified if he knew I'd seen the bruises on his back. I brought you a mug of hot chocolate, I tell Evan, placing it gently on the glass protector on his side table next to his bed. I pull back the sheets and help Evan climb back into bed. He sinks back gratefully into the dry sheets. I bend over to kiss him on the forehead, not caring about the painful spasms that are twitching on my back. I leave the bedside light on for him, so he can easily access the mug of hot chocolate that I've sprinkled generously with marshmallows as a special treat. Night-night, Evan, I say. You sleep tight. Don't let the bugs bite. Night-night, Aunt Evie. Thank you, Aunt Evie. Aunt Evie? Yes? I love you. I love you too, Evan. Good night. Good night. I surreptitiously return to my bedroom, tiptoeing down the passage, trying to be as quiet as I possibly can. But sleep eludes me that night, as now all that assiduously consumes me is the thought of those ghastly, gruesome black bruises on Evans's back. Where did they come from? Who is responsible for unleashing their dreadful wrath on this poor vulnerable child? No wonder he's wetting the bed. I would be too if someone were beating up on me like that. I have an instinctive, intransigent feeling that my sister is the likely offender. But do I report child abuse when my sister is the abuser, especially without any real evidence? You can't just randomly spout accusations against someone without having real proof. I decide I need to have words with my sister, warn her that if she lays another finger on Evan, I'll be reporting her forthwith to the authorities. When my sister arrives at my front door the following evening to pick up Evan, I can see he's reluctant to leave with her. It dawns on me that he's afraid of his own mother. I haven't even noticed this before, but now it's as clear as a bell to me. It's all I can do not to snatch Evan away from my sister, bustling him back to the safety and confines of my own apartment. But then again, Evan is not my child. I need to have a private word with you, Roberta, I say to my sister. It's very, very important. It can't wait. My sister frowns. She looks irritated. Really, Evie? Why can't it wait? I'm in a dreadful hurry. It's an hour's drive back to the farmhouse. I've still got to cook dinner when I get back. Can it not wait, please? I'm so tired. Unlike some people, I've had a really tough day. I haven't been lying on the couch, watching movies, eating popcorn and sleeping at will like you have. I need a word now, I say to Roberta, my voice raising its frequency, so much so that Roberta realizes I mean business. All right, Evie, but you must be quick. Roberta walks unsteadily into my kitchen. Her high heels clip-clop loudly on the white marble flooring. I notice she looks more dishevelled than usual, as some mascara has leaked down her left eye, and her perfect hair is looking a little tousled. She lets out an aggravated sigh, leaning against the sides of the granite island, looking at me through menacing eyes. I realise how intimidating she must look to an 8-year-old boy. It's like her pugnacious expression is challenging even me to dare say anything that might just ruffle her feathers, so I tread cautiously with my words. But I know this issue needs addressing, and I'll try my level best to be as diplomatic as possible in the circumstances. I'm worried about Evans, I say. He's covered in the most dreadful black bruises all over his back. I noticed them last night when I lent him a T-shirt to wear, as he had no pyjamas. He didn't know I saw the frightful condition of his back. Someone has been hitting him very hard. It's not you, is it, Roberta? You wouldn't be hitting your own son, would you? Because if I see any more marks on him, I'm going to have to be forced to tell the authorities. I can't sit back and watch my nephew being abused. You do understand that, don't you? My sister's face colours. Her golden skin grows a bright crimson. Her jaw tightens. Her chest stiffens. "How dare you suggest I would hurt my baby?" she says defensively. "I would never lay a finger on Evans. You know I wouldn't. If he's got bruises, it must have been due to falling in the school playground or something. You don't have kids, so you wouldn't understand. But I assure you, boys get into all kinds of scrapes. Now I need to go," she demands. She marches obstreperously out of my apartment, banging her high heels extra loudly in the corridors to express her level of indignation. She's holding her son's hands tightly in hers. I watch them both leave. My sister glances briefly back at me. I discern a disquieted, anguished look in her eyes. I chastise myself for being contentiously confrontational with my sister. I mean, what am I like? No wonder she's so flustered and reacted so adversely. No one likes to be falsely accused of something they never did, do they? Of course she'd never physically abuse her own son. Maybe Evan did hurt himself in the school playground after all. Little boys are always getting into scrapes, are they not? What was I thinking? Granted, she has a sharp tongue on her, rather like a razor blade, and she can be a big bully. But I'm sure she'd never lay a finger on my nephew, would she? But somewhere deep in my gut, I sense I'm deceiving myself, as the truth just does not bear thinking about. It's easier to believe the best in my sister than to ever conceive of her bullying or subjugating my poor nephew. But in the depths of my heart, I really sense my sister is the offender. The truth will come to light very shortly. It seems my predictions are bang on the money. 2 weeks go by without so much as a word from my sister. She's never been this quiet before. If I didn't know any better, I would think she was deliberately avoiding me, although I do get regular calls from Evan, telling me what he's doing and saying he misses me a lot, which is very sweet of him to say, as I'm quite sure back at the farmhouse, surrounded by the delights of the natural world, there are 1,000 more exciting things to be done, rather than hanging around in the apartment with me. It's on a Friday night that I wake up with a start. There's a loud, urgent hammering at my front door. I audibly groan. Who could be waking me up at this ungodly hour of the night? I sit up. The pain in my joints is fierce and unrelentingly vicious, but I need to sail over that pain to get to the door. My doorbell ringing is louder than ever, regularly interspersed with loud knocks. Someone seems hell-bent on getting my attention. But who? I stumble out of bed awkwardly, almost shrieking out internally as the painful spasms dart around my body. I grab my dressing gown, tying it around my middle, throwing my feet into my slip-on slippers. Finally, heaving and groaning in agony, I open the door as draughts of cold air pummel my face. It's my sister Roberta standing in the doorway. Her face is distraught. "What's wrong, Roberta?" I ask, sensing something quite terrible has happened by the frightened look on my sister's face. "Evans, he's gone," she whispers. "He's gone." My hands clasp my mouth in astonishment. "What do you mean, Evans is gone?" I ask. "Evan ran away from me tonight. I think he's hiding out in the woodgrove. I can't find him anywhere. Suppose something has hurt him. There's all kinds of wild animals in there. He's in danger, sis. What am I going to do?" "Well, did you call the police?" "Are you kidding? Those bruises you saw on Evan's back. I did them, sis. I didn't mean to, of course. Sometimes he just makes me mad. If I call the police, they'll lock me up for child abuse and take my son away from me. I know if you call him in the woodgrove, he'll come to you. I've been calling him for ages, but he won't respond to me. But I'm sure he's there. I really need your help. You need to come at once." "So Evan ran away because you hit him? Is that what you're telling me?" "He was goading me," my sister explained. "He was going on and on about being hungry. I had a tough day at work. I threw the sandwiches he made at the wall because he made such a mess. I might have lashed out at him, I can't remember, but he makes me so mad at times. You don't know how tough it is to raise a kid. And you think you may have hit him, but it happened so much you're not sure if you did or didn't. Is that what you're telling me? I asked, looking at my sister aghast. He's an 8-year-old child, for goodness sake. You don't lash out at a kid like that. No wonder he ran away. Before I know it, I've thrown on a pair of jeans, sweatshirt and sneakers and dashed down to my sister's vehicle with my thoughts only on finding Evans. I was so concerned about my nephew that I barely noticed my own pain as my sister drives in silence towards her farmhouse, an hour's drive out of Seattle. What about Rob? Where is he? Isn't he supposed to help you look for Evan? We're not together anymore, my sister admits. Like all the men that ever date me, he's also left me. Same old story. He tells me I'm a bitch. Can you believe that? What a bloody cheek. And after everything I've done for him. Yes, I can believe it, I think to myself. I can believe he calls you a bitch. But I say nothing. Only I do try and encourage my sister to call the police. But she's having none of that. No, we can't call the police. No. I know that Evan, he will come if you call him, sis. He's not going to respond to me. I've upset him this evening. But I know if he hears your voice, he'll come running. He loves you for some reason. God only knows why. I ignore my sister's scathing comments, and I ask her how long he's been missing. Since about 8 o'clock this evening. But it's 12 o'clock already. It's about 1:10 in the morning when we finally arrive at the farmhouse. And before I know it, I've a headlamp on my head, and I'm following my sister on the edge of her farmhouse, beyond her boundary wall, to a hiking trail that leads into a large, sumptuous woodland sanctuary that's open to the public for walking dogs or riding horses. Evan has told me a lot about this gorgeous place before. He tells me it's his favourite private oasis. It would make perfect sense if he was hiding out here somewhere, to escape the wrath of his mother. But Roberta is absolutely right. For a young 8-year-old boy to be hiding out in the woodgrove at night, it could potentially be highly dangerous for him. He would almost certainly be easy pickings for a coyote or mountain lion. I shudder at this thought, trying to focus my attention on the job at hand. I need to find my nephew, and I need to find him now. I know he's in here, she tells me. He adores these woods, but I've been calling him for hours now. There's no response. Well, perhaps it's better if I go alone, I suggest. If you've upset Evan tonight, he might not come to your calls. Oh, thank you, sis. I'm so grateful for this. It's my thoughts exactly. You don't mind going alone, do you? She puts a rifle in my hands for protection. No thanks, I say, passing the rifle back to her. I'll be fine on my own. My sister watches me as I amble into the woodgrove. It's amazing how my earnest concern for my nephew's welfare has enabled me to ride over my pain, like a mountain bike over a hilly incline. I'm now so concerned for his well-being that I can think of little else. I decide to myself that if I cannot find Evan, regardless what my sister has to say about this matter, I will be calling the police. Furthermore, something needs to be done about my sister's physical abuse towards her son. Now I know about it, I simply cannot turn a blind eye to it. If it wasn't for my sister's outbursts, Evan would not have run away from home and be put in this danger in the first place. I hold my sister responsible for what has happened, and can only hope that my nephew is all right. I notice that as I venture into this woodland sanctuary, it gets darker and darker, as the moonlight is blotted out by the closely packed tall and skinny trees, rising up proudly into the sky on this dark, tenebrous night, like vertical sultry giants. I find when I stick to the trail, I am befriended by the soft moonlight that generously trickles through the canopy, lighting up the way with an ethereal softness that is almost ghost-like and outer-worldly in its luminescence. But it beckons me kindly, as if leading and guiding the way, and encouraging me to hasten my pace. The cool breeze is feisty and rambunctious. It throttles the needled boughs of the ponderosa pine trees with aggressive nudges, causing them to swagger in the wind, while the airy, whistling, howling sound it makes sends shivers coursing down my spine. I think about my poor nephew caught up in the forest like this. This night feels duplicitous, as though it has nefarious intent, harbouring its unearthly secrets beneath the dark shadows. Surely Evan must be very scared, I think. I know I would be, wearing his shoes. The forest is so intimidating at night, very threatening. I'm all too mindfully aware that what you cannot see is what is likely to be of the greatest concern. There could be anything ominous lurking in this gloomy, dusky penumbra. I marvel at the heady, buttery infusions of burnt caramel that linger in the woodgrove, as the sweet smell of the ponderosa pines is incredibly pronounced tonight. It would seem that beyond the wailing wind, everything is unnaturally quiet. Too quiet, I hasten to think. I'm bewildered by the fact that I haven't heard the single hoot of an owl, the chirp of a cricket or croak of a frog, or even the distant howl of a coyote. I then begin to call my nephew's name. "Evans! Evans! Evans! Evans, where are you?" I call, but I am greeted by the stiff, unyielding silence, and beyond the screaming, disembodied sounds of the wailing wind, that is all I hear. Undeterred, I try again, raising my voice higher above the wind so that it echoes through the woodgrove like a loud siren. My voice feels hoarse, my throat dry and scratchy, my heart choked with concern. I'm about to call out his name again. Then I see her. She makes her approach towards me on the earthen trail. She moves so gracefully through the trees, swinging her arms backwards and forwards in perfect seamless alignment with her powerful long legs. For a moment, I don't know what she is, but a generous shaft of moonlight brushes scantily across her back, but her golden eyes stare at me through the velvety blackness, and they are wide and big, but filled with such a soulful kindness that in no way is menacing. Then the light of my headlamp basks this creature generously in an effusive, warm yellow light. I audibly gasp, surely not. But a second look at this creature confirms my former instincts. I am staring at a Bigfoot. I can't believe it. I absorb the creature's profile like a hungry sea sponge, lapping up every physical detail for memory's sake. It's hard to fathom what I'm beholding, but I know that what I'm perceiving is no trick of my mind, or the product of an overactive imagination. I am cognizant of the fact that I should be afraid, but where is my fear? It has alienated, abandoned, and distanced itself from me, heedlessly running away from my grasp. It wants no part of this indelible experience that will surely change my life. I should feel intimidated, subdued, and overawed, should I not? I should feel conspicuously small, standing in front of this powerful, majestic, lofty creature. But all I feel is awe, wonderment, and intrigue. I am befuddled by how tall this creature is. She towers at 8 foot, easily weighs over 700 pounds, possesses a large pair of breasts that hang low upon her chest like empty sacks. She's covered in long, flowing dark hair with an auburn hue. She has a gable-shaped head, a long human-like face that has a distinctly feminine appearance that is both handsome and endearing. I notice the creature is looking at me intensely, almost as if she's looking beyond the human scaffolding, right through to my joints, marrow and sinew. It's like she's looking through me like an X-ray machine. I discern she can see things that I cannot see, possibly my auric field. I notice her golden eyes are focused on my back. Her overlong arms are pointing at my back in such a way that I think she's seen a spider crawling on my shoulders. So I start swatting the insect, but the creature moves towards me, shaking her head. Before I know what to think, the creature flops my upper torso over her long arm. She reaches for my back, pushing it hard in a particular place. I hear this huge cracking sound, almost like a broken limb out of alignment being clicked back into its rightful slot. She then puts her hand over the area, rubbing it up and down my spine. I feel this delicious warm energy shooting up and down like electricity. Waves of warmth flood my body. To my immense surprise, the pain I initially felt has completely gone. I feel energized, as my former exhaustion has dissipated like the steam from a kettle. I manoeuvre my body in the position that causes me the most pain, but I feel no pain at all. I am dumbfounded. What did this creature do to drive my pain away so fast? For the first time in ages, I actually feel normal. I watch the creature as she moves away from me. She looks into my eyes with her golden gaze. Then I hear the words in my head. It's connected now. The pain and tiredness should go. I don't know what she means, but I nod, because my body is tingling all over with a warmth from her touch. The Bigfoot whistles, and then from behind the bush I see Evans cautiously approach. I realise that this remarkable Bigfoot female has been taking care of Evan in this dark, inhospitable place. She's taken him under her wings. She's watched over him, protected him. "Thank you for looking after him," I say to the Bigfoot, "and thank you for helping me with my back." She nods. She turns around and glides away until she has vanished from our sight. Evan is delighted to see me. He hugs me as tears trickle down his face like raindrops on a glass pane. "Please don't make me go back to live with Mummy. She's always hitting me. I hate her." "Of course you can come and stay with me," I say, putting my arms around my frightened nephew. We retreat together out of the forest. My sister is waiting for me outside of the forest. Her face floods with relief as she sees her son. I can see tears welling up in her eyes, but I push her away from Evan when she tries to hug him. "Don't touch him," I snap. "You've done enough, sis. I think you should take me and Evans back to the apartment for a couple of days, and then you and we need to talk." My sister does not argue with me. She prepares some clothes for her son. She drives me back to my apartment. I can tell she's afraid. "You're not going to shop me to the police, are you, sis? Please don't tell them anything. I told you I didn't mean to hurt Evans. I just get angry sometimes." "I told you," I said. "I've got some thinking to do. I'll be in touch." The following morning when I awaken, I discover it's afternoon. I cannot believe I've had such a restful sleep, without any hiccups during the night, no disturbances. I slept soundly. But as I climb out of bed, I feel no twitches of pain. I'm desirous to almost scream with joy. It seems too good to be true. Then I remember the previous night, what the Bigfoot had done for my back. She had seen something that was out of alignment in my energy field or something. She had fixed it, and whatever it was, it had caused my insufferable pain for months and excessive exhaustion to just dissipate. I dashed quickly over to my wardrobe, hastily throwing on my jeans and sweater, and I enter Evan's room. I can see he's exhausted. The poor boy is passed out on the bed, dead to the world. So I leave him to sleep. But half an hour later, when he wakes up, he's very surprised when I announce that we're going for milkshakes, followed by a movie, and then a pizza at my favourite Italian restaurant. "But Auntie Evie, what about your pain?" "It's gone," I explain. "For some reason that Bigfoot in the woods did something to my back. She could see something was wrong in my energy field. I felt this big click, and then this infusion of warmth and electricity, and the pain just melted away like butter. And since then it hasn't come back. I'm going to keep my fingers crossed while I feel this good, and hope and pray it never ever comes back. But while I feel like this, let's go and enjoy ourselves, shall we?" "Yay! Yay! Yay!" says Evans. After Evan is tucked into his second chocolate milkshake, he tells me everything that happened that night, without any restraint. Evan's story. I was sitting in the sitting room playing with my Xbox. I can hear Mum on her cell. She's getting irate with someone at her office. It's not unusual for her, as she's always losing her rag. But on this particular evening it is worse than usual. She's rarely livid. I can always tell this because her neck goes red, and her nostrils start to flare. She screams down the cell at her assistant. "How can you be such an idiot, Elaine? You spell Mr. Van Ossington. You've spelt it wrong. What were you thinking, girl? It's not 2 O's, it's 1. Are you a complete, total and utter moron? You're my assistant manager, for goodness sake. I am supposed to be able to rely on you to do things correctly, Elaine, but I can see that's far too much to ask of you. You know how bad this makes me look? You were supposed to proofread everything before you sent it off to the printers. I relied on you for that. Are your brains in your knickers, or are they in your pocket? That's what I want to know, because they're certainly not between your ears, where they should be. This is your fault, Elaine. You must phone the company at once and take responsibility for the mistake, because it's not mine. Of course I didn't tell you that Mr. Ossington had 2 O's in his name. Are you mad? You can't put this one on me, girl, or there'll be hell to pay. She pauses for a moment. Well, you tell him he'll have to wait 3 days owing to your blunder. We can't do reprints sooner than that. You apologise and take responsibility. She slams down the phone, looking furious. Bitch, she screams. Bitch! I knew I couldn't trust her to get a damn thing right. Why are people so bloody stupid? Mammy? What is it, Evan? Can you not see I'm busy? I'm hungry, Mummy. I'm really hungry. My stomach is rumbling. I can see she looks angry. She grabs me by my shoulders and squeezes them hard as she shakes me. You're hungry, are you, Evans? Can you not see I've got more important things to do than worry about your dinner? You've got legs, haven't you? Why don't you use them? I nod. Well, then get off your fat, lazy backside and make yourself something to eat. I'm not your servant, am I? I go into the kitchen to prepare myself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and then Mum comes into the kitchen. She's speaking to Elaine on the cell again, strutting around the kitchen angrily. Are you not listening, Elaine? I've told you this 1,000 times. Tell the bloody client that the soonest that we can complete the printing is in 3 days' time. We can't work faster than that. I told you, 3 days. Or are you completely harebrained? She quickly switches the phone off. Then she gasps when she sees I've spilt peanut butter and jelly over the granite surfaces of our kitchen. She runs towards me, shaking me fiercely. Look at the bloody mess, Evans! You've spilt peanut butter and sticky jelly all over the place. Can't you do anything right? Are you a complete moron? She shakes me hard, belligerently throws my sandwiches against the kitchen wall in her frustration. Jam and peanut butter are dribbling down the wall, while the dismembered pieces of bread are lying on the floor, pulverised by their violent journey to the ground. There you are! Clean up the mess now, will you, Evan, and throw those sandwiches in the bin. No, I said defiantly. You threw the sandwich at the wall, not me. I won't clean that mess up. I'll clean up the jelly on the granite surfaces, but you caused the mess on the wall. It's your fault. Mum becomes incandescent. Her face reddens. She dashes towards me and beats me with her fists. I'm your mother, Evan. You don't talk to me like that, do you hear me? You do what I tell you to do. She slaps me violently hard across the face. It really stings. I run as quickly as I can to the front door, open it and dash out of the farmhouse as fast as I can, with Mummy screaming for me to come back. Come back, Evan! Come back! Get back right here now, you brat, or you'll be in big trouble. Do you understand? I know she can't be trusted. She's in a truculent mood, so I run and hide in the woodgrove. The tears are pouring down my face. I just know that I'd rather stay out here in this dark forest all night than be with my mother. She scares me when she's angry, and when she's like this, she lashes out at me so hard. On one occasion, she gave me a black eye. I had to pretend I walked into the door by mistake. I know in the morning my mother will have calmed down significantly. I feel hungry and tired, but I decided I'm better off hanging around in the woods, because my mother can't hurt me here. The woodgrove is dark. I can barely see my hands before my face, but I don't care about that. It's scary because I can't see where I'm going. But if I stick to the path, I find the moonlight that trickles through the canopy helps me to see the path ahead of me more clearly. But all the surrounding vegetation is very black. I can barely distinguish one plant from another. I hear my mother screaming my name. Her voice begins to sound panicky, but I'm not bothered about that. Evan, please come back! But I ignore her desperate pleas. I find a hiding spot under a little bush. I curl up into a round ball and fall asleep. I'm desperately tired. I can barely keep my eyes open. Sleep overtakes me. It's chilly in the forest, but I'm so tired, none of that matters. After a while, my mother's frantic calls begin to dissipate. I wake up to find myself in the warm arms of a hairy creature. I'm about to scream in horror, but as I look up into this human-like face with large golden eyes that are like liquid pools of love, I immediately feel safe in her charge. I can hear her voice soothing me in my mind. I'm not here to hurt you. You go back to sleep. I'll watch over you and keep you lovely and warm. She then senses I'm hungry. She goes off for a moment, coming back with a basket filled with berries. I eat them all the while she watches me. The fruit is deliciously sweet. It fills me up nicely. I know at once she's a Bigfoot. I've seen programs and documentaries about them before, but most of the time they say horrible things about them. But they can't be true, because this lady Bigfoot is ever so nice. She genuinely cares for me. I can feel her matriarch-like tenderness. I go and lie in her arms. She rocks me to sleep, while she hums some strange song in a language I'm not familiar with. I think she's singing to me, but her voice is soothing. It hits all the low notes. A while later the Bigfoot pokes me gently to wake me up. That's when I hear your voice calling me. The Bigfoot appears to read my mind. She can tell I'm very pleased to hear your voice. I say in my own head, that's my aunt, but she's in far too much pain to come and get me. How can it be her? It would hurt her body to leave the house, so why is she here? The Bigfoot is looking at me. I know she's reading my thoughts. I hear her say in my mind, I'll whistle if it's safe for you to come out. You stay where you are. And a little while later she whistles, and then I come out. I was so pleased to see you, Aunt Evie. Please don't make me go back and live with my mother again. Please, can I stay with you? He begged. I'll see what I can do, I said. Me and your mother need to have words together. I'll arrange for her to come over to the apartment for a chat. When my sister arrived at the apartment the following evening, she was not full of her normal condescending jabs. If I'd known any better, I would say she looked quite scared. You know why you're here, Sis, I said. She nodded sheepishly. Look, Evie, it'll never ever happen again, I promise you. I'll never so much as lay a finger on my son again. Liar, says Evan. You always hurt me, Mummy. You'll never ever stop. I want to stay here with Evie. I hate you. I'm sorry, Evan. I didn't mean to do what I did. I will never lay a finger on you again, I promise. I don't believe you, Mummy. Let's not go there, Roberta, I say. You've clearly got a problem with anger. You need help. It's not normal to beat up your own child. If Evan continues to live with you, I am going to have to report the bruises to the authorities. It's my moral duty. Sis, if you do that, it'll ruin my reputation. I'll get into trouble with the police. And if my boss hears about that, bang goes my career. You could always let him move in with me, I suggest, and have supervised visits. I don't mind that. To cut a long story short, I was fortunate to give my nephew Evan a full childhood. A miracle happened in the woodgrove that night, after that Bigfoot performed some strange, miraculous manoeuvre on my back, clicking something into place, laying healing hands on me, because my chronic fatigue syndrome vanished and never reoccurred. I was able to regain a full life again, of which I am heartily grateful for. You would think I would rush back to my old career, but not so. I didn't want to, given that Evan required my undivided attention. He deserved to have a full childhood. So I decided to run my own cosmetic business online. I wish I could say my sister has changed over the years, but she has not. After a while she stopped even requesting to see her son. She completely lost interest in him. Evan began calling me Mum. Roberta is still going through men faster than candy drops, and lives a miserable, solitary life, never understanding that it's her sharp tongue that drives people far away from her. But any mean words she throws my way are always like water off a duck's back, as I will never allow them to get me down. I think some people are just intent on being horrible, but as far as Evan is concerned, he no longer wants to be acquainted with his mother again. But I am ever grateful for a night in the woodgrove that changed my life, bringing me both healing and joy. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. For most people, they have very little memory of being 7 years old. And likewise for me, that is almost certainly the case. With one exception, however. There is one day that stands out in my early childhood, above all the other days. It is firmly seared in my mind, like an indelible, imperishable tattoo that can never be erased or extinguished. For as anything that has a prominent, noteworthy impact in your life that is never forgotten, that day for me is so vivid, it is almost as clear as it was for me when I was just 7 years old. I was the youngest child, as I had 2 older stepbrothers at the time, from my father's first marriage, who were 10 years older than I was. So in many regards, with such a vast age difference between us, you could easily say I was like an only child. It's not that my stepbrothers Patrick and Emmett ignored me, but it was more that they were caught up in their own lives and had very little in common with a 7-year-old boy. At the time, my family lived in a gorgeous farmhouse outside of Seattle, nestled in the heart of the idyllic countryside. We owned several acres and a large stable block and barn. My dad would commute to the city every single day. Both my parents avidly cherished and fully appreciated country life and all its abundant rich treasures, so the harassment and inconvenience of travelling into Seattle an hour each way was certainly no skin off my father's nose, for it meant that we could fully enjoy the bounteous, exhilarating fresh country air and go riding regularly in the countryside. We owned 3 American quarter horses in Black and Bay, and there was a plethora of horse riding trails and sumptuous woodland areas around where we lived for us to regularly frequent, as we lived in an area with an overabundance of trees, along with a plenitude of charming indigenous wildlife. I remember one day my father returned home with a rifle, as he was eager to learn how to hunt, and had already been on some hunting excursions at a hunting lodge under the instruction and guidance of a seasoned professional. I remember my father was beaming from ear to ear as he began examining his rifle ardently. He looked as proud as Punch. He kept opening and closing his gun, loading and unloading it. It was like the little ebullient boy in him came bobbing to the surface like a dolphin riding the waves of the sea, for his face registered such a jubilant, gleeful expression as he attentively rubbed the cloth in his hands up and down his weapon, shining it lovingly, while making some appreciative sounds in the back of his throat, which he always did when he was really chuffed about something. I remember he was so voraciously engaged in examining his new possession that he failed to see me standing there in my Thomas the Tank Engine pyjamas, watching him in a solicitous awe. My 7-year-old mind was in overdrive, like a tenacious, frenzied bee, getting excited over a can of fizzy cola. My father's fervent enthusiasm for his new toy was assiduously infectious on a 7-year-old boy. My mother was calling my father, and in a moment of distraction, when his attention was diverted, he put his rifle down on the bed, in a nonchalant way, and ambled past me. He went directly to the kitchen to speak to my mother. Much like a vulture descending on a carcass I was eager to devour, I dived onto my father's rifle and began to play with it. I was in fervid awe of how magnificently beautiful it was. The weapon felt heavier, much more solid in my hands, so much superior than the inferior plastic fake rifle my dad had bought me for Christmas the previous year. This was the real deal. I could feel the quality of this rifle that I was holding. Even at 7, I could discern the difference. My mother came into the bedroom moments later. In horror, she saw me playing with my father's rifle. Upon seeing her entering the room, I decided it would be great fun to shoot her, so I pointed the rifle directly at her. She naturally thought my dad had put the safety catch on and left the rifle unloaded. Even so, she wasn't happy with me pointing the rifle at her. "Put that down, sweetheart. That's a real rifle. It's dangerous. You must put it down now." Her voice almost became commanding in its tone. "This is serious, Jamie. This is not funny. Put that rifle down and don't point it at me like that." "Pow wow, pow wow. I'm going to shoot you, Mummy, 'cause you're a very bad Red Indian. You stole my cows. I'm shooting you dead right now," I chuckled. Then I pulled back the trigger and said, "Pow wow." To my horror, the bullet came flying out of its chamber and went blasting through the wall with such an ear-piercing ferocity that I was terrified. This wasn't fun like I'd anticipated it would be. This was very scary. I'd missed killing my mother by a hair's breadth. My father came darting into the bedroom. My mother's face had gone so pale. All the colour had drained from her, and even at 7, I remember exactly how pale she became. "Give the rifle to me, sweetheart," my mother said. I handed it to her swiftly. She took it from me, sighing with relief. "You neglected your rifle! You left it unattended!" My mother shrieked at my father. For goodness sake, Edwin, what the heck were you thinking? Our unchaperoned 7-year-old boy was playing with a fully loaded weapon. I nearly got killed, Edwin. How could you be so reckless? Surely you know it's incautious to leave a rifle lying around for an inquisitive little boy to play with, let alone a loaded one. Everyone knows it's an accident waiting to happen. It's asking for big trouble. You hear dreadful stories all the time of little kids accidentally killing a family member. You should have known better, Edwin. This is the height of irresponsibility. I'm frankly quite appalled. This time it was my father's face that grew as white as a sheet. Oh, my God, he said, clasping his hands over his head. I cannot believe I was so impetuous, reloading and unloading the rifle so many times. In my head it was fully unloaded. But you're right, sweetheart. I should have never left it unattended like that, especially fully loaded. What the heck was I thinking? Oh, my word! You could have been killed! You stupid, stupid idiot! How could you, Edwin? The reality of what had transpired hit my mother rather like a brick to the head. Suddenly tears poured down her face. She was smacking my dad hard in the chest. Imagine if Jamie had killed me! How would a little boy have to grow up with killing his own mother on his conscience? How would he handle that? Imagine if he had to be raised without a mother because of what you've just done. I began to cry, for even at 7 years old, the blast of that gunshot was exceedingly powerful. I realized the dreadful ramifications of what I could have potentially done, how close I'd actually come to killing my mother. I'm sorry, Mummy. I'm really sorry. I'm so sorry. My mother ran over to me. She gathered me into her arms. It's all right, darling. You weren't to know it was loaded. You see the rifle Daddy bought you last Christmas? It's not real. It can't hurt anyone. But this rifle here, it's very dangerous. You see the damage it's done to the wall? That is what a bullet can do to a person. It's quite horrific, isn't it? You can see how lethal a weapon like this is. I looked up at the wall and nodded. There was a gaping hole, causing the insides of the wall to buckle inwards. It horrified me to realize that if the bullet hadn't missed my mother, it could have potentially done the same damage to her body. My father removed his rifle from the house, placing it cautiously into the trunk of his car. I'm taking it back, he exclaimed. I cannot ever have a rifle in our house again. I've lost the right to own a deadly weapon like this. Our lives were so nearly ripped apart today because of this bloody thing. I could see his former jubilant face had become gravely serious. I could tell that his preceding feelings of wondrous awe over his rifle had been hijacked by a tangible revelation that as a family we'd had a lucky escape. After that fortuitous, inadvertent incident, my father wanted nothing to do with rifles ever again. Even growing up, he simply refused to even buy me an imitation one. My father completely lost interest in learning how to hunt. I think the implications and full gravity of what he had done weighed heavily on his heart. He struggled to forgive himself for what so nearly could have ended up being such a devastating tragedy for our family. Of course, you don't ever forget an incident as life-changing as that. How can you? For as much as the bullet ripped into the wall of our home, so did the memory pierce its way into my young, impressionable mind, never to be expunged or vanquished. But for me, rather than the memory being tormenting, it aroused within me an extraordinary fascination for rifles. I do remember as I got older, my best friend Piers Vorderman would take me regularly with his family on hunting weekends. Naturally, I never told my parents about these exciting excursions, for they would have put a stop to such adventurous, risky endeavours. So I was clandestinely secretive about what me and Piers got up to. By all accounts, my father would have been mortified to know I was handling a rifle, so the less he knew about what I got up to behind his back, the better. When it comes to sons, it's probably that way for most parents, if the truth be told. The Vordermans were an affluent, wealthy family, so they paid for me and Piers to have hunting tuition. and both agreed under the sensitive circumstances that it would be mindfully sagacious not to inform my parents about our target practices and hunting expeditions, as they both comprehended such dismaying revelations would leave both of my parents feeling unhinged, unsettled, and exceedingly discomposed. Despite my dreadful setback at 7 years old, when I so nearly killed my mother with a hunting rifle, I didn't thankfully appear to suffer from the same post-traumatic stress disorder that had clearly held my parents captive for so long. Perhaps being that much younger at the time, I was far more resilient, but one thing I knew for certain, I was passionately zealous about hunting, and thoroughly enjoyed all my hunting excursions with the Vordermans. So not being able to share my fabulous conquests with my family was somewhat disappointing, but I knew it would serve only to upset them and ruffle their feathers, as I astutely discerned that even broaching the subject of hunting brought my father out in a cold sweat. When I was 21 years old, Mrs. Vorderman brought me my own rifle as a 21st birthday gift, unbeknown to my parents. It was a Weatherby Vanguard Series 2, which is great for beginners, and is a good all-round bolt gun, which I kept in the Vorderman's rifle cabinet, away from the beady eyes of my parents. Pierce and I acquired our hunting licenses. My parents were none the wiser. The less they knew about my fervent passion for hunting, the better. I knew if I told them about what I was doing in my spare time with Piers, they would have tried to put a spanner in the works, so I remained very nonchalant about what me and Piers got up to, as let's just say, still waters run deep. One day when I was 22 years old, me and Piers went to stay at the hunting lodge for about 5 days, courtesy of his parents. The hunting lodge was a private hunting retreat owned by Mr. and Mrs. Bucher, and it was a rarely cosy retreat where the lodge provided the hunters with their own sumptuous luxury-appointed cabins, where no expense had been spared, but all meals were served up at the main lodge in the restaurant area and prepared by an all-American chef who was big on his southern culinary creations that were quite literally out of this world. The glamorous hunting lodge was reminiscent of a grandiose Swiss chalet. It was nestled in the heart of a beguiling, undulating hilly valley that stretched back over an expansive, viridescent area that alternated between wood groves, open clearings, gravel pits, quarries, ravines, and fields of sagebrush, as the all-embracing, multifaceted landscape was richly diverse. The hunting lodge was the Vordermans' best-kept secret. They were old family friends of the Buchers, as Mrs. Vorderman and Carol Bucher were at school together and had both been tennis champions. The lodge itself was fitted with sumptuous fireplaces for those freezing cold winter nights, a library for reading, a games room, a television room, a dining and breakfast area, a gymnasium, a small beauty salon, a nail bar, and even an indoor swimming pool with a bar attached. At dinner that night, Carol Bucher asked me what I remembered about being 7 years old, when I'd been handling my dad's rifle, for Mrs. Vorderman had told her about me shooting at my mother when I was only 7. "Have you forgotten the incident, dear?" she asks me. "I mean, you were so young at the time, weren't you? I don't think I can remember much about when I was 7 years old." "I remember everything," I said stoically. "Actually, it's almost as if it was yesterday for me. Every single detail. From my parents' mortified faces to the banging sound of the rifle tearing through the walls of our house. You don't forget an ear-piercing noise like that. It was terrifying. I do remember that." Oh dear, said Mrs. Bucher. "No wonder your parents are so traumatized to even own a weapon. The mind boggles, doesn't it, as to what they must have gone through that day. Did they ever receive trauma counselling after the event?" "No, I don't think they did," I told her. "But I think they should have done so. You can't even mention a rifle to my father without him going as white as a ghost and physically shaking like a jelly." Mrs. Bucher looks at me through her brown, perceptive eyes. She wipes the pastry crumbs from her mouth. "That's a pity," she reflects. "It might have been a good idea to have counselling. The fact that you have to keep your hobby a clandestine secret from them suggests to me that they were unambiguously traumatised by the incident and possibly have never fully recovered from the shock, which is tenable in the circumstances." I say nothing. For a moment there is a stiff silence around the table. So Mrs. Bucher, sensing the awkwardness, tactfully changes the subject. Guess what we've got for dessert tonight, she pipes enthusiastically, her face brightening. It's key lime pie, your favourite, Piers. Piers' face lights up. He flirts with Mrs. Booker. You didn't, Mrs. Booker, did you? He teases, raising his brow. You're the absolute best. I did, she said, and it's cooked by me, not by the chef. It's an old recipe given to me by one of our regular hunting wives. It's never failed me yet. Everyone simply loves this dessert. It's incredibly refreshing. She was right. It certainly was the most delicious key lime pie that I've ever tasted. So tell me, boys, she says, you've pretty much got the hunting lodge all to yourselves. We've had no bookings over the next few days, so you're not going to run into any other hunters. The whole place is pretty much your oyster. So if you need a picnic basket, don't forget to ask Chef Solly to accommodate you. He's good like that. He'll even drop the picnic basket at a specific location so you can pick it up at lunchtime without having to return to the lodge. He'll also prepare you an early breakfast pack, if you're intending to set off before the sun rises, with thermos flasks full of coffee and sandwiches. It's important to make sure you're organised for the hunt. The last thing you want to be worrying about is your empty stomach. You can get very hungry and thirsty hiding out on one of those deer stands for hours at a time. Make sure you spray yourself down well with one of our scent blockers, because those deer will smell you coming. They're very astute. Thank you very much, Mrs. Booker. It sounds like a great idea. I think we'll take you up on your offer. We'll order a picnic basket from Chef Solly, and some early morning coffee and doughnuts. Pierce and I are intending to awaken early, before the sun rises. We scouted the area earlier on today. We found a hunting stand one of your boys erected a week ago. We rather like its location. It overlooks a pond and a gravelly beach. Clever, clever boys. Sounds like you've picked an excellent location for yourselves, says Mrs. Booker. In my experience, if you're close to water, you've got a reasonably good chance of taking down a sizable deer with a good rack. But I must reiterate that scent control and wearing the right temperature control camouflage gear are some of the most important things you can do on a hunt. Of course, you boys know by now that remaining quiet and inconspicuous is pivotal. As the deer are savvy, sharp, intuitive, and sagacious, they can easily discern the presence of humans. Many of our hunters completely forget to keep quiet. It's a classic mistake. If the deer discover your hideout, you've inadvertently ruined the hunt for yourself. In that regard, you'll more than likely walk away empty-handed, without any trophy to boast about. You probably don't know this, but we tend to change the deer stands here regularly, every 4 weeks or so. For our hunters, we move them to different spots. You see, if we don't, we find the deer will avoid those former hunting stands. They're very weary, exceedingly clever. My husband ensures we never check the trail cameras too often either. That's another classic big mistake hunters make. As once again, the deer will pick up on human scent if you keep trudging through the undergrowth to look at a game camera all the time. While they're a useful tool, they can also end up backfiring on you big time. That night when me and Piers retired to our charming little wooden cabins, with their inviting, cosy, snug beds, generously layered with sumptuous crisp Egyptian cottons and goose-down feather duvets and pillows, we both went to bed fatigued but exhilarated and inspired, with hearts fluttering with an exuberant anticipation for the day that lay ahead of us. We both knew that this would be the first time we would be hunting together alone, as a team, without adult supervision. We were thrilled by this challenging, yet somewhat daunting prospect. I went to bed with illustrious visions of taking down a large deer with a sizable rack. Before long I had drifted off to sleep. I woke with a start to find Piers shaking me. "Get up, sleepyhead. Are you ready to get moving?" "But I've only just got to sleep," I complained. "Correction, you've been asleep since 10 o'clock, Jamie. You've had a good 7 hours on you." I groaned, dragging myself reluctantly out of bed, rather like a disagreeable sloth that didn't fancy moving a muscle. I was yawning, throwing my arms above my head in a sizable stretch, what I would have given for a few more hours' sleep. But as I climbed out of bed and hurriedly dressed in my hunting ensemble, I began to feel the familiar stirring of excitement in my gut. almost as if 1,000 monarch butterflies were fluttering in my belly. We discovered that Chef Solly had generously left us a delectable box of goodies for breakfast, red velvet donuts and muesli muffins, along with coffees, outside the door in a box. I threw the contents into my light backpack, and armed with our rifles and head torches, we made our way. It was still dusky, but as we neared our approach to our destination, it was steadily becoming visibly lighter with every passing moment, so that the slate and grey silvery clouds marbled a faint dusty blue sky that was birthing over the horizon, while the faint yellow blobs of colour, intermingled with a burnt orange, spread across the sky like big splashes of vibrant paint, to herald the dawning and arrival of a brand new day, with the great pomp and ceremony that only nature can provide. As we entered the forest, the wind was a whole lot less fierce, as the tall imposing ponderosa pines and Douglas fir trees offered us a generous windbreak. We trudged over a vast area of perfidious, somewhat treacherous earthen terrain, with our hardy walking boots, which had become like an inconvenient interruption and cumbrance for us, as we negotiated our way across this unyielding, ancient, exposed root system that jutted above the forest floor, like gnarled bones, and was quick to ensnare an unsuspecting boot in one of its protruding, overhanging appendages, if your attention wavered even for a brief second. Finally, I'm glad to say, the unrelenting, unkind earth became more dignified, tamer, and magnanimously more accommodating for us, as the gracious ground gradually evened out, became smoother and more amenable to tackle underfoot. Before long we were walking along a flat expanse, prettily dappled by a few fallen leaves and forest debris, along with a scattering of viridescent ferns, and a prodigal persuasion of green climbing undergrowth and Spanish mosses. We were profusely surrounded by the tall, imposing, congenial presence of a plethora of ponderosa pine trees that serenaded us by vigorously swaying their needled boughs, and the delightful buttery sweet infusion of their subtle bouquets lingered in the air. More transfixing still was the scattering of pretty morning shafts of sunlight that danced so gracefully through the forest canopy, bespeckling the terra firma in a beguiling injection of a faint silvery luminescence that was almost fairy tale-like in its ethereal delicacy and sheen. In a trice, almost as if the music centre of the woodgrove had been turned on with just the press of a button, the bird song burst forth in a crescendo of trills, warbles, whistles, and tweets. We knew with certainty that the morning had arrived. We quickly, with a cautious determination, meandered towards the fringe of weeping willows that veiled a sizable silvery pond that sparkled and twinkled in the early morning light. We climbed up stealthily into our tree stand that was camouflaged superbly behind a large weeping willow tree that overlooked the pebbly beach that led to the water's edge. I knew that if any deer made their approach to the water, we would have a perfect shot here. The hunting stand was solid with 2 seats and a couple of outdoor all-weather cushions along with a table. We took our seats cordially. I opened up a flask of coffee, pouring both me and Piers a mug of the steaming hot drink. "It doesn't get better than this," whispered Piers. "This coffee tastes amazing." "Well, everything tastes good out of doors," I agreed. "I'm so glad the wind has finally abated. It looks like this is a great day for hunting. Look at how magnificent the pond looks with that silvery sheen. It's breathtaking." Soon we ate our doughnuts and waited for a long while. Then we hit pay dirt, as several deer came to the water's edge to enjoy a drink, but we realized they were young. There were about 4 does with their younglings, and that was not our intended quarry. We were looking for a male deer with a large rack, but we wisely ascertained we wouldn't have much longer to wait. I was already feeling excited as I watched the deer enjoying their drink. They didn't seem too concerned, and I knew that they hadn't picked up on our scent. The little deer flickered their tails while they drank, and they trotted beside the larger females and ambled away. It was fabulous sitting there on the tree stand, watching the water rippling in the morning light, and breathing in the crisp fresh air. I suddenly got the overwhelming sense that I was being watched. But how was that even possible, I wondered? I was up on a tree stand. Whom could be looking at me? "Piers," I whispered, "something is watching us." "Don't be silly," he said. The only thing that has seen us hiding out here is a few of our feathery friends, but nothing else. I promise you, I assured him. Something was watching us. Piers indicated for me to be quiet. He put his fingers on his lips. That was when we saw 3 male deer, with impressive-looking racks, scampering to the water's edge for a drink of water. They appeared much more nervous than the female does had been. Their ears kept twitching. Their eyes darted around the landscape nervously, almost as if they sensed something untoward on the wind. Me and Pierce were prepping ourselves to take a shot at one of the deer. But in what seemed like seconds, we saw this massive black human-looking silhouette darting thunderously through the undergrowth, moving at such a rapid speed that it was hard for my eyes to adjust to this strange impostor, as this monstrous hair-covered beast with its pointed human head dived onto one of the deer, breaking its leg to immobilize it, and then with one large hand he twisted the deer's neck, so the head dangled limply from its carcass, and the creature tossed the deer over its shoulders, simply gliding away, moving with such grace that he almost looked as if he was floating. We knew we'd seen a Bigfoot. We were astounded. I think the Bigfoot must have been about 8 foot tall, 600 to 700 pounds, covered in long flowing dark hair. But it had been so obscure, so hazy, as everything had happened far too quickly, that me and Piers began to almost doubt what we had seen. "Did that really happen?" said Piers. "Or was I imagining things? No, we saw a Bigfoot. I am certain of it. We saw a Bigfoot." We both stared at each other in disbelief, feeling that this day had started with a very exciting bang. Things were only going to get a lot better. But was it possible that no more deer would come towards the water's edge after one deer had already been hunted down by a Bigfoot? It was moments later that I suddenly realised I needed a pee, and I was so annoyed when I realised I'd forgotten to bring a bottle along with me. "I really need to go," I said to Piers. "Are you kidding me? Can't you at least hold it in a little longer? Wait until lunch." "Oh, no, absolutely not. I cannot do that. I'm desperate. I'm barely managing to hold it in now. I just can't possibly wait." "Well, make sure you don't go close to the stand then. Be discreet. Remember there's a Bigfoot out there somewhere." "I'm sure he's long gone, but I really must go." "Well, then be quick about it, bro." I decided to walk far away from the deer stand, towards a more dense area of shrubbery, perceiving that if I peed over some rambunctious undergrowth in a less accessible area for the deer, I would possibly be able to cover up my pee more discreetly. I had brought along with me some odour repellent, so I would spray over the area. I moved across some shrubbery. The next thing I knew was I lost my footing. I went slipping down and down and down this large hollow in the ground, like an old mining shaft or something, and after that I went completely blank. Piers's account. I was growing increasingly worried, as Jamie had not returned from his pee. He'd been gone for some time, without his rifle. What did I do, I thought? Sit here in the deer stand and wait a little longer, or should I go and look for him? Then it occurred to me that Jamie could have potentially run into a lot of trouble. I'd heard unfavourable stories about dangerous Bigfoot encounters before. Could it be that Jamie had inauspiciously bumped into a Bigfoot? Possibly the Bigfoot we'd seen earlier on this morning killing the deer. Had something terrible happened to him? This incredible, gruesome thought made my blood run cold, for I knew that an altercation against a Bigfoot that size, my friend would invariably never stand a chance. I hastily climbed down my deer stand, with my rifle at the ready, as I cautiously investigated and thoroughly scrutinised the area we'd recently frequented, calling out my friend's name at the top of my lungs. "Jamie! Jamie, where are you? Jamie! Jamie, where are you? Jamie! Jamie, where are you?" I heard this thumping, booming sound, like something ponderously weighty, substantial in size, was thundering through the undergrowth, moving towards me at a rapid speed, almost as if sensing that someone was in grievous trouble. For I will not deny that my fretful calls had blistered my fear with trepidation. The only way I can liken the reverberating clamorous sound is to a very large herd of prodigious bison, blasting across the open plains, beating up the soil with their powerful hooves. It sounded exactly like that. I stood still for a moment, My thoughts seemed to have been hijacked from me. My ability to react, think and reason had floated away into the ether, rather like a balloon on the wind. I was left feeling blank, my mind an empty white canvas waiting to be anointed by an artist's colour. Then I saw him. I am certain it was the Bigfoot we had seen earlier, killing the deer. This intimidating, lofty creature was tall, majestic, imposing, powerful, and his daunting presence made me feel as minuscule as an ant. The creature stood there looking at me through golden eyes. I realized in that instant he had responded to my frantic call. He had come to my rescue. He was here to help me. I just knew that with every fibre of my being. I will never ever forget the kindness of his golden eyes, the genuine concern written across his human-like face. "I can't find my friend," I told him, pointing around the place. And I say this without any exaggeration. The creature perceived my very words. He understood what I was saying. He began to sniff the air, as if smelling a scent trail. I straggled behind him. But it wasn't just a scent trail he appeared to be picking up on. It was like he was tuning into another worldly frequency, human vibrational energy fields, I guess. And then there he was, gliding directly towards the trees. He was hastily pulling back this pile of creepers with his very large hands and looking down in the ground. He indicated for me with his hands to come over, as if he'd found something, so I quickly ran to the spot, fearing the very worst. Was I going to find the deceased body of my friend lying there? The most foreboding feeling overcame me. My heart missed a beat. My throat became dry and scratchy, rather like sandpaper. To my horror, I was looking down a large hollow in the ground. Jamie was lying motionless at the very bottom. I couldn't tell if he was alive or dead. I called out to him, "Jamie! Jamie! Can you hear me? Jamie, can you hear me?" But I was met with silence. He did not respond to me. I could feel the alarm rising up in my blood, as I began to fear the very worst. The Bigfoot held up his hand towards me, like a lollipop lady at a pedestrian crossing, as if telling me to wait. I saw him break down a tall tree with one hand, almost as if it was made of paper. It came crashing to the ground so effortlessly, landing only yards away from us. The Bigfoot tore off the needled boughs with his hands, with a speedy efficiency, and then using a stone he made some footholes in the pole. Then he lowered the pole into the bottom of this hollow. The Bigfoot shimmered down the pole like a fireman on a pole, and then he reached the bottom. He threw my friend over his shoulders like a sack of potatoes, and virtually balancing on one leg, he seemed to bounce from one foothold to another, as if he was playing hopscotch, until he laid my friend on the ground next to me. I quickly checked for a pulse. My friend was alive. He seemed concussed as he began to groan. I indicated for the Bigfoot to carry my friend for me. He followed behind me with Jamie on his back, until I led him through the wood grove. I pointed to the large picnic hamper that was waiting there for us to collect, and indicated to the Bigfoot that it was for him to enjoy later. He nodded at me as if to say he understood. The Bigfoot followed me towards the hunting lodge, and then I indicated for him to put my friend on the ground. Luckily no one was around, as I don't think the Bigfoot would have appreciated being seen by anyone. Once he'd glided away, I called for help. The ambulance took Jamie to the hospital. I was to learn that Jamie had a bleed on the brain. The doctor said he was lucky to have been brought to the hospital in record time, as he could so easily have died from his injuries. For a start, I don't think we would ever have recovered my friend in time, if the Bigfoot had not been able to detect where he was, as he had fallen through that shaft that no one knew even existed. They filled the shaft after the incident, and human bones were found in the bottom. They were identified as belonging to a Swedish hunter who had stayed at the lodge and gone missing. I think he must have accidentally fallen down the shaft, and of course no one could fathom how I'd rescued my friend, but I was not about to tell anyone about the Bigfoot. I pretended I'd found the pole and used it to access my friend, whom I carried on my back. "Incredible," said the doctor. "How did you have the strength to do that?" "I don't know," I lied. "Sounds like you had angelic help," said a nurse. "No, silly," said one of the other doctors. "Have you men forgotten the power of adrenaline?
when in a state of shock, people have been capable of performing amazing feats that they cannot achieve in the cold light of day, like lifting up huge, very heavy things that they would not normally be capable of lifting, or running faster than they've ever run before. My bet is that Piers was able to do the impossible in a heightened adrenal response.
And everyone agreed that that was the most likely scenario, so I left it at that. Although, of course, I did promptly inform James that he was rescued by the Bigfoot we had briefly seen earlier on in the morning. He had a brief recollection of being carried by a very large pair of hairy arms, but he'd thought that was a dream. We still go back to the lodge regularly for hunting weekends, as Jamie fully recovered from his head injury. One day we were taking a picnic in the woodgrove, and Chef Solly said to me, "I would appreciate it if you would not fill the basket with river stones after you've finished eating your picnic. It can damage the basket." Mrs. Booker looked at me and said, "That's a strange thing to do, Pierce, filling the picnic basket with river stones. Why would you do such a peculiar thing?" "I don't know," I said. "I thought they were very pretty." The chef raised his brow, as though he'd heard everything now. But I secretly realized that those river stones had been placed there by a very grateful Bigfoot, who clearly thoroughly enjoyed the picnic. I know the picnic basket that day contained cold pork pies, chicken wraps with avocado and halloumi cheese, pita pockets filled with tuna salad, barbecue chips, a bunch of grapes, oranges and nectarines, and last but not least, 2 thick slices of carrot cake and a large bottle of ice-cold Mountain Dew. I guess the Bigfoot enjoyed the food. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, after both of my parents retired, I was handed over the reins of the family business, with my parents still acquiring a percentage of all the profits to fund their retirement, which certainly was a lucrative way of making easy money. To access Oakfield storage units, you would have to drive through a large iron gate with a professional intercom system that went through to the site office so that anyone on duty could let you in and out of the premises at will. The storage units were built like garages, where people could store anything that tickled their fancy. We had all kinds of customers hiring out our storage units for personal and professional use. One of our clients was actually using his storage unit to store a small plane. Others stored fancy cars, personal possessions, furniture, antiques, books, farming equipment, paintings, clothes, cosmetics, office equipment, staging materials, DJ equipment, and so much more. We had hundreds of these lock-up-and-go storage units that varied both in size and cost. There was always someone on duty at the site office, manning all the storage units, handling telephone calls and inquiries, answering emails, and dealing with customers. 2 night watchmen were always on duty, night after night, during the twilight hours, guarding the premises punctiliously. They regularly patrolled and policed the asphalt roads that bordered the long vertical row upon row of built-in storage units that rather resembled garages. They also assiduously monitored the closed-circuit security cameras. If you took a right-hand turn on the asphalt road beyond the site office, it led to an ornate wrought-iron black gate with a wooden signpost that read Oakfield Manor. This was the back entranceway to our farmhouse, which was a traditional classic farmhouse with a grey slate roof, pale green shutters and large French windows. We also owned a relatively new white stables block, a red barn, and a couple of large undulating meadows, where our horses happily frolicked during the day. The left meadow was fringed by rather dense wood groves, tightly packed with tall imposing Douglas fir trees, where a straight ribbon of asphalt ran directly through its midsection, which was used by our family and friends to access the front entrance of our farmhouse, and for quick journeys to the nearby town. If you looked beyond the viridescent vertical forms of the trees, in the furthest distance, dappling the horizon, was the rise and fall of the magisterial lordly mountains, that was so transfixing they always commanded our attention. They bruised the skyline so gracefully, in a plethora of pinks, purples and blues. When my husband Jerry and I got married, I will profess that he was not exactly enamoured about taking on my father's storage unit business. But he quickly amended and modified his thinking when he became acquainted with the fruitful financial rewards of owning such an expediently advantageous enterprise. My husband judiciously extrapolated that it would almost certainly free some invaluable spare time up for us to indulge in our favourite hobbies, and as we were keen horse riders, our lifestyle soon marshalled our very best interests most favourably. My parents had been running these storage units for many years, without any major problems ever arising, until Bobby and Eric, our night security watchmen, reported peculiar activity one night that seemed to be related to storage unit number 313. This was to unearth a brutal, gruesome secret that would shock us to our core. Bobby's story. I've always been a dreadful insomniac, struggling desperately to get to sleep at night, constantly waking my wife up with my restless tossing and turning. She sagaciously suggested that it made perfect sense for me to get a nighttime job, especially as I couldn't get to sleep, for we could most certainly benefit from the extra income. That was when I began working as a night watchman for Oakfield storage units. As the new boy on duty, Eric introduces me to the ins and outs of the job, and of course the code language used on the walkie-talkie system. "It's pretty straightforward," he tells me. "We have walkie-talkies, so you can let me know how things are going when it's your turn to patrol. You need to walk up and down the rows of the storage units and report back to base. We will alternate our shifts, keeping each other posted all the time. One man watches the security surveillance system here in the site office, while the other steadily patrols the premises. We keep in touch with each other via the walkie-talkies, looking out for anything untoward that grabs our immediate attention. You'll be glad to know we're connected to a security armed response team, so we call them if anything merits further investigation or is concerning to our safety. We can also contact the main house. You press this red button over here. It sounds an emergency alarm that rings through to the main house, alerting Jerry and Jennifer Patterson that they are needed on the premises at once. They will arrive here fully armed should there be an intruder." I can see Eric is quite a lot older than I am, well, at least by 30 years or more. He might be in his early to late 60s. His skin is well weathered, very creased and bronzed, by far too much sun exposure. He's lucky to have a full head of white hair, a diamond-shaped face with long sideburns, framed by a rather short white box beard, with a distinguished-looking walrus moustache. He has piercing blue eyes that almost look right through you. He seems to be a consummate, accomplished, rather proficient night watchman that is adept to his job. I ask him why he's doing this job, as my curiosity is aroused.
"It's always about the money, is it not?"
Eric admits to me, tweaking the corners of his rather impressive moustache reflectively.
"I found out after I retired that, let's just say, my retirement package was not sufficient to cover the cost of living, so I decided to take up night work. It's a bit of a bummer finding your retirement fund is not adequate enough, but I'm not alone in this regard. I don't mind, really. If the truth be told, I do rather enjoy working a bit. I tend to listen to the radio a lot. The twilight hours go by very quickly, I find, and before you know it, it's time to go home. What about you? What's a young man like you doing in a job like this?"
"Well, I do have a day job working for a lighting warehouse, but the extra money's a big bonus, is it not? I've got a wife and 2 kids of 4 and 6. My wife complains tirelessly that my inability to sleep is driving her potty, as I toss and turn all night with my senseless insomnia and keep her awake. It was her idea for me to take on night shift work."
"It sounds like your missus has got her head screwed on all right. Having you out of her bed at night guarantees she finally gets some decent shut-eye,"
Eric teases. "Something like that," I say, grinning. For the first couple of nights things go predictably smoothly, without any fortuitous interruptions. Me and Eric take it in turns to watch the monitors, while vigilantly patrolling the area. But on the third night, something strange started to happen during my shift. "It's my turn to patrol the storage units," I say to Eric, who was reading a book. He looks up at me and nods, taking a large sip of his coffee. "Keep me posted, bro," he says. I leave the sight office quickly. I'm immediately struck by what a tenebrous night it is. Everything appears swathed and blanketed in a velvety blackness, as an impenetrable mist has obscured the former generous ethereal luminosity from both the moon and the stars, so that their light is significantly dimmed, subdued, and rather repressed by this thick, cloying, choking fog that seems hell-bent on hanging out in the sky tonight. It is rather like the twilight has adorned herself in a menacing ambience, like an illustrious jet-black cloak. I am mollified and reassured by the sounds of the crickets and frogs, and the distant calls of coyotes, and of course the very favourable light of my torch that offers me a small measure of comfort. Without it I would not dare to venture out in this night alone, for it claws at me with a pervasive unsettling feeling that teases my flagging confidence. In truth, I would like nothing better than to hightail it back to the sight office as fast as I possibly can. But it is my profound sense of duty to do my job thoroughly that gently nudges me ever forwards. I walk awkwardly, pressing my Doc Marten boots on the asphalt pathways, passing the long rows of innocuous storage units. I'm almost certain I see a dark shadow. Then a loud, violent flapping of wings grips my heart violently with a baleful terror, while every hair on the back of my neck is standing up on edge. I nearly jump out of my skin. I oscillate my arms, manoeuvring my torchlight towards the shifting shadow. I see a large barn owl darting down on the ground, lifting up a huge rat into its powerful talons. I sigh with relief when I realize it's only an owl. It raises its powerful wings, gliding gracefully to the top of the flat roof, perching there, clasping the rat in its claws, devouring its prey as it stuffs large chunks of the juicy flesh into its open beak. The rat shrieks, but is soon silenced, as its painful squawks ebb away. I watch the owl for a moment, as it stares at me through its bright yellow eyes, continuing to eat. It seems undaunted by my presence. "Don't do that again," I tell the owl. "You scared me half to death, flapping like that." But the complacent, apathetic owl just perches on the roof after it finished its nightly snack, and then it begins to hoot. All of a sudden I hear an ambiguous whispering sound in my ear. It is an inaudible, faint, muffled voice. It feels as if someone's lips are tickling my ears. What the heck, I think. Then something appears to be touching me on my back, tapping me like someone intent on getting my attention. I turn around, half expecting to see Eric, but nothing is there. Am I going completely stark raving mad, I begin to wonder. I realise that the owl affrighted me so much. I must have imagined things, I thought. But the whispering in my ear, I still can't comprehend. It is when I pass Unit 313, I hear a muted noise coming from inside the unit. I press my ear to the door. I'm sure I can hear an imperceptible faint woman's voice mingled within the static electricity. It's a peculiar sound, like a radio frequency that is not correctly tuned to the right station. I think someone has left a radio on in their unit, but I'm sure the battery will finally wear down, as the indistinct, evanescent sound seems to be fading. I turn around to walk away. In a trice I notice that everything has become unnaturally quiet. So deathly quiet, in fact, that you can almost hear a pin drop. This is the kind of stifling, inauspicious silence that has an unsettling vibration. I then realise exactly what's wrong. It hasn't become apparent to me before, but for some absurd reason of which I cannot explain, the sounds of the crickets and frogs that normally serenade the night have all but been vanquished. Everything has become eerily still, almost as if the night itself has unnaturally clammed up. It's like there's a foreboding, threatening ambience that sends Arctic cold, icy chills plummeting down my spine. Get a grip, I tell myself, get a grip. I try to get a signal on my walkie-talkie, but I'm greeted by the undeviating static. Damn, I think. "Eric," I call. "Can you hear me? Eric, can you hear me?" All I hear is the static electricity, which is exceedingly annoying. With every minute this night is becoming less and less routine. I cannot escape the unfathomable feeling that something is very, very wrong. Something is off tonight, but I'm not sure exactly what it is. I continue my walk down the different passageways, past various storage units. I get this evocative, haunting feeling that I'm not alone. It's an unearthly, atmospheric feeling. I turn around to check my immediate surroundings, using my torchlight to scan the area thoroughly. But I see nothing but a long stretch of storage units. Then ahead of me I see a woman in a nightdress running down the asphalt pathway. She looks terribly afraid. She glances at me briefly, with eyes full of trepidation. Bloody hell, I think. Who is this woman? Why on earth is she running around the storage unit in her nightdress? "Excuse me, madam. Excuse me." She looks at me. I see the one side of her head is dappled with blood. There is blood trickling down her nightdress. I think the woman is in serious trouble. She looks confused and bleary. She clearly needs help. "Excuse me, madam. Excuse me." I call after her. The woman looks at me with wide, terrified eyes. She begins to run. I pick up speed, but she seems to vanish before my very eyes. Where the hell did she get to, I wonder? I try to get through to Eric, but once again my walkie-talkie is only operating on static electricity. What the heck is going on here? I try to look for the woman, but she is nowhere to be seen. It is like she has simply vanished into thin air. How is that even possible, I think? I venture past unit number 313 again. I hear the undistinguishable radio noise has got significantly louder. I hear a woman's voice calling for help within the static frequency. "Help me! Help me!" But the sound is so discomposing that with my heart thundering through my chest, I hightail it back to the site office as quickly as I possibly can. Eric looks up at me when I enter the site office because I'm out of breath and my face has gone as white as a sheet. He has a bewildered expression upon his face. "What's wrong?" he asks, looking up at me in surprise. "Did you see a woman on the security footage?" I ask. "There was a woman. She had blood on the side of her head. She was wearing a nightdress." Eric goes back to review the recorded security footage. You can clearly see me calling out, running after what appears to be nothing. "I don't understand," I say, looking at Eric in befuddlement. "There was a woman there. You can see I'm running after her, but she's not on the footage." Eric's forehead crinkles with perplexement. "You do look like you're chasing something, bro. But there is nothing there." "But I don't understand. There was definitely a woman there." "There can't have been, bro. Can you not see there is nothing to be seen on this footage?" I feel confused. I know exactly what I saw. I proceed to tell Eric that there's also a problem with Unit 313, and that when I went past it, it sounded like there was a radio on in there. It was all static, but when I'd walked past the unit again, the radio appeared louder, and amidst the static I'd heard a disembodied voice calling out for help. Stranger still, I tell him, I did try to contact him on the walkie-talkie, but it just became static. "That is extraordinary," says Eric. "Nothing like this has ever happened before. Look, I will go and investigate. I will look around. You stay here. I'll see if I can spot anything untoward." Eric's account. I had worked night shift at Oakfield storage units for 2 whole years. Nothing outlandish or peculiar had ever happened like this before. I could discern that Bobby was always level-headed and pragmatic, not given to fanciful ideas or a lucid imagination, so I wasn't certain what to make of his enigmatic account. He seemed so convinced that he'd definitely seen a woman. I studied the recorded footage closely, where he claims to have had the encounter with this mysterious, terribly frightened woman. If I look at Bobby's face on the monitor, I can see his facial expression changes from bewildered to very alarmed. He appears to be running after someone and seems genuinely confused on camera when he cannot find the woman anywhere. I can see his stupefied, aghast reaction as he walks past Unit 313. I'm certain that something freakishly incongruous has transpired, for the footage I am observing is exceedingly compelling. Maybe Bobby witnessed something spectral that is not of this world, so I tell him to keep a watch while I go and investigate. I've been a night watchman for many long years, have worked at different facilities all over North America. You do hear stories from other watchmen who claim to have had paranormal encounters. I've never had a ghostly encounter before myself, so in truth I had never really given such phenomenon any credence, not until Bobby came into the sight office looking genuinely rattled, with a face that had quite literally drained of all colour. You can't make a look like that up. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that something had really irked him. As I left the sight office, I will say that from the word go, something felt distinctly off. I realised it was a lot darker than it usually is. There was a distinct chill in the air. The temperature had plummeted. It was a lot colder than it had been in the sight office, and I could see my own breath before my face. I think the most discomposing thing of all was just how eerily quiet everything was. In the 2 years I've worked at this storage unit, I have never known it this quiet before, so it was oddly bizarre, as the normal trilling of the insects was confiscated on this night. I moved my torchlight as I walked down the different roads, lined by the storage units. "Bobby, can you hear me?" Bobby answers. "Go ahead. Everything looks fine so far, but it's quite cold and very quiet tonight." "That's what I thought," said Bobby. "Over and out," I say. I continue to investigate the area, and when I walk past 313, I hear fast feet running past me, along with frantic breathing, as if someone is desperately out of breath. But I see nothing, but I certainly felt a presence. I stand very still, casting my torch over the area, but still I see nothing. Could I have been mistaken, I wondered. I was beginning to even doubt myself. Did I really hear those feet running past me? As I walk past Unit 313, I do not hear any radio blaring. "Do you read me?" "Affirmative," came Bobby's voice. "I'm at Unit 313. It's very quiet. No radio sounds." "Good," said Bobby. "Over and out," I say. But as I walk away, I hear the sound of someone drumming the metal door of the Unit 313, and a woman's voice saying, "Help me! Help me!" I quickly dash over to the garage-type door, banging it. "Hello," I say. "Is anyone there? Is anyone there?" But there is no answer. I am now completely nonplussed. I don't know what to make of anything, but I quickly return to the site office. I know without a question of a doubt that something very peculiar has happened here tonight, but what, I cannot imagine. Jennifer Patterson, her account, on the very same night. I was lying in bed fast asleep. I woke up with a start. I wasn't certain why I'd woken up so suddenly, for usually I sleep like a log throughout the night. I quickly climbed out of bed, glancing out of the upstairs bedroom window that overlooks the front yard. I could see the silhouettes of the tall ponderosa pine trees blowing gently in the breeze, along with a crescent moon that seemed obscured by a hazy mist. I decided to go downstairs to get myself a cup of warm milk to drink. It would help me get back to sleep, I thought. I quickly grabbed my dressing gown, wrapping it around my middle and slipping into my slippers. I trailed down the stairs, smiling to myself as I tiptoed past my husband, as he snores quite loudly. When I entered the kitchen, my dog Rover, a black Labrador, was sleeping in a basket in the kitchen. He was scratching at the kitchen door and whining. "What's up, boy? Do you want to have a pee?" I said. I quickly opened the back door for him, and my dog still remained in the kitchen whining. That was unusual for him. That was when I saw a tall figure that was blacker than the night, standing several feet away from the kitchen door, looking directly at me. It was indicating for me to follow it, but what the heck was it, I wondered. I grabbed the torch that was balancing on the kitchen windowsill and switched it on. Within seconds, my torchlight had lit up the creature's body. It was covering its eyes, as the bright beam of my torch seemed to feel invasive to it. I could see that this tall, hairy being was a Bigfoot. Truly, I was so astonished by what I was beholding that I had to once again bathe this creature in light in order to make absolutely sure that my eyes were not deceiving me. I'm not certain why I felt no fear, as I almost certainly should have done so, as this Bigfoot was incredibly intimidating, enormous, with a head that rose up to a pointed tip, and a body built like a tractor. It was burly and large, with long flowing dark hair that was so incredibly black it was almost navy. I think when you see something that shocks you so much, it serves to paralyze your senses, so what you are perceiving seems to be surreal, so much so that your fear capsizes like a large ship at sea, sinking to the bottom of a deep ocean, so that with no fear to propel your instincts, you allow intrigue and curiosity to guide the way, which is what I did. The Bigfoot was indicating for me to follow him, and I did so without hesitation. I assure you I was not locked under some kind of hypnotic trance, as you might expect. I sensed I needed to follow this Bigfoot, with a reluctant dog trailing behind me, who was none too happy. The Bigfoot then stopped and looked at me, his eyes locked into mine. I heard the words, "She needs your help. She cannot rest." The Bigfoot began to point at something. I couldn't see what he was pointing at, so I put my torchlight on in the direction that he was pointing to. I gasped when I saw a young woman there. She was wearing a white nightdress. Her eyes looked petrified. I noticed that there was blood trailing on the side of her head. "Hello! Can I help you?" I called, but she vanished before my eyes. Where had she gone? For only seconds she had been there, and then she just vanished. The Bigfoot looked at me. His eyes met mine again. I heard in my head, "She cannot rest. Help her." And then he glided away and was gone from my sight. "Hold on a minute," I called after the Bigfoot, but he was nowhere to be seen. Much like the woman, he also disappeared from my sight, rather like a ghost. What the heck was going on, I wondered. I remember returning to my kitchen and saying to myself, what the heck was that? I saw a Bigfoot and a strange, frightened-looking girl in one night, who vanished before my eyes. In fact, they both did. Why did the Bigfoot want my help? I didn't know who the girl was either. I proceeded to make myself a mug of warm milk and returned to bed. But the following morning when I woke up, I almost believed that the whole experience had all been but a dream, a lucid dream at that. But I soon discovered that there was dirt on my pyjamas and dressing gown, and there was a saucepan of milk on the hob, and when I ventured outside, I found a footprint in the ground that was 20 inches across, that could have only belonged to a Bigfoot. I also found that my kitchen door had been left unlocked. No, it had not been a dream. But what did the Bigfoot mean when he said she could not rest? And why had he asked me to help this strange woman who had been bleeding on the side of her head? I didn't even know who she was. It was when I went to the site offices in the morning and received the kooky reports from both Eric and Bobby about the strange anomalous experiences that they both had on the very same night as me, that I knew something inexpediently obstreperous was going on. It would seem that Bobby had seen the same young woman in a white nightdress who was bleeding on the side of the skull that I had been shown by the Bigfoot, whom had told me she needed my help and that she couldn't rest. It seemed both my night watchmen had heard a woman calling for help at one point, and both men had confronted some strange action coming from unit number 313. Bobby had thought he had heard a woman calling for help on a radio with a lot of static, while Eric had heard someone slamming the inside of the storage unit and crying out for help. I deduced that something was clearly going on within Unit 313. I opened my books and discovered that a month ago Unit 313 had been rented out by a man called Jeffrey Davies. I had remembered the man phoning our officers up, saying that he needed to hire a storage unit at once. When I met him, he seemed a bit panicky and flustered. He looked unkempt, like he hadn't shaved or bathed in a couple of days. I do not normally ever open someone's storage unit unless there's a fire hazard or something else going on. But based on what my 2 night guards had experienced the previous night, I knew I needed to open the storage unit and investigate with my husband, who was less than enamoured by the idea.
"Do you know how crazy you are sounding?" he protested. "A Bigfoot asking you to help a woman who can't rest. I'm sorry, Jennifer. You're talking complete nonsense. How can you expect me to even take you seriously? Are you having a laugh or something?"
Think what you like, Jerry, but ask both the night watchmen. They can both verify a woman was crying for help from Unit 313. And I have it on good authority that Bobby saw the very same woman in the white nightdress who had blood on the side of her head as I did. I don't think he saw the Bigfoot, though, but he definitely saw the woman.
"Bobby told you this," said my husband. "But he's so astute and level-headed. He'd never make up something like this."
Thanks a bunch, Jerry. So you're saying you believe Bobby's account? How do you think that makes me feel? What about mine? Why don't you believe me?
"Well, 2 of you say you saw this strange woman, so that's good enough for me. So even though it goes against our protocol, in these enigmatic circumstances, I think we should take a look at Unit 313. Break down the lock."
My husband breaks open the lock. We open the storage unit number 313. I honestly don't know what I was expecting to see, but there was a normal black SUV car parked in the storage unit, a big drum, and a few bin liners and a couple of boxes piled high with personal items. I opened a couple of bin liners to find they were stuffed with women's clothes that looked like good designer garments that had been jumbled up in bin bags like bunches of rags. "These are quality garments," I say to my husband. "No normal person stuffs designer clothes in a bin bag like this. That's decidedly odd. These expensive clothes should be hanging on a clothes rail, even if you're donating them to charity." I open another bin liner and discover a woman's makeup bag filled with Christian Dior, Lancôme and Yves Saint Laurent makeup, and there are 3 bottles of perfume, Miss Dior, Opium from Yves Saint Laurent, and Année Année. Then I discover a selection of very expensive designer purses. One of the purses contains a passport, a driving license and a wallet. Her name is Francesca Davies. She's 28 years old, according to these documents, I tell my husband. Why are her essential documents lying in a storage unit like this? You've got to admit it, Jerry. This is a little bizarre. Something's clearly not right here.
"Maybe she died," said my husband, "and her husband couldn't bear to throw out her stuff. So he piled it up and left it in a storage unit. Maybe this vehicle also belongs to her."
"Well, what's in this drum over here?" I asked my husband. "I think we should definitely look inside it."
"This is not our storage unit, honey. We cannot go poking our nose into someone's belongings like this. We've already done so. Everything here looks above board to me. I can't see anything untoward here."
"You can't see anything untoward here, Jerry? I can't believe you. Are you blind or something? I see a lot of things untoward here. A woman's magnificent clothes thrown into a black bin liner as if they're rags, her makeup bag containing all her makeup, and a purse with all her essentials willfully tossed into a large box. You've got to admit something's rather dodgy here. And given what the security guards witnessed last night, a woman was calling for help. You've got to open that large drum. I'm not going to be happy unless you do it, and if you don't, I'll do it myself. Then I'll feel assured we've looked over everything. I have to see what's in that drum."
"Very well," said my husband, "if you insist."
He opened his toolbox, and he pulled away the lid from the drum. Suddenly, as he opened the lid, the storage unit was filled with the most ghastly, repugnant scent of rotting flesh, feces and decay. It was a repugnant, vile smell. I will never forget that smell as long as I live. I wanted to hurl up the contents of my stomach. I felt violently sick. We looked inside the drum briefly. We saw a bloated green-looking body. It was the deceased body of a young woman. "Oh, my God!" I screamed. "Put the lid back on, Jerry," I said, covering my mouth with my hands. "Oh, my God, it's a poor girl. She must have been murdered by her husband. This is a crime scene. We have to call the police at once. Oh, the smell! I'm going to throw up. It's ghastly. I feel like vomiting." I am very fortunate that I personally knew one of the detectives very well, working at the police station. I was able to find out all the grisly details concerning this case. I felt personally involved, as did both Bobby and Eric, who had heard the ghost of Francesca crying for help from beyond the grave. She really wanted her body found, and would not rest until it had been recovered. I realised that me and Bobby had both physically witnessed Francesca's ghost, wearing a white nightdress with a bloody patch on the side of her head that exposed the lethal gunshot. I do remember she looked as real as you or me, which was why at first I didn't comprehend she was actually a ghost. It would seem that Francesca's lost soul had even commanded the attention of a Bigfoot, whom had sought out my help. It really was an extraordinary case. One day I invited Bobby and Eric to tea, along with Officer Neil Wilson, who had been given permission by his superiors to give us the inside details of the story, given that without our intervention, Francesca would have ended up as a missing person. I prepared a delicious tea at my home, with a plethora of creamy chocolate eclairs, a lemon drizzle cake, chocolate brownies, sausage rolls and cheese muffins. I had known Neil Wilson for many years. We had been at school together, so connecting with him again was like old times.
"This is very cosy, Jennifer," said Officer Wilson, giving me a warm hug. "It seems like only the other day we were at school together. Doesn't time fly by so fast?"
"It does," I laughed. "I remember even in junior high you would prattle on about becoming a police officer one day. And here you are, look at you. I remember we would play cops and robbers all the time. I cannot forget how many times you placed those handcuffs on me. I think you enjoyed that far too much, if you don't mind my saying so."
"I know," grinned Officer Neil. "You know I never wanted to be anything else but a police officer. But I assure you, it's not nearly as fun cuffing people as it was cuffing you back then."
I grinned. "One thing that hasn't changed, Neil, is that you're as cheeky as ever."
He laughs. "Well, in this profession, you need a very good sense of humour."
Oh, by the way, Neil, I'd like to introduce you to Eric over here. He's been with us now for 2 years as a security watchman. And this is Bobby, who joined us not too long ago. They're both incredibly mystified by this case, as much as I am. You see, they were both eyewitnesses to the strange phenomenon that happened that night, that drew our attention to storage unit number 313. Bobby here thought he heard a radio with static going on in the unit, and he picked up a woman's voice calling out for help. And Eric here heard someone slamming the inside of the unit. A woman was calling for help there. It was all on the same night. Me and Bobby both saw a woman with a nightdress who was bleeding on the side of her head. Officer Wilson pulls out a cell phone from his pocket.
"I took a picture of what Francesca looked like when she was alive. Did the woman you saw look like this?"
He shows me the picture. My blood runs cold. "That's her! That's the girl I saw!" Then Bobby examines the photograph. His face grows white. "That was her," he agrees. "I'd recognise her anywhere." I think the thing that perturbs me the most was she seemed so real, but she was also disorientated and very confused, rather like a deer caught in headlights.
"So you both clearly saw Francesca's ghost," said Officer Wilson. "You would think I would be cynical about such things. But on the force, with many of the gruesome details we uncover, it is not uncommon to hear a ghost story attached to one of the cases. So I'm not as sceptical as you might think I am."
I can't believe I saw a ghost, I say. But I decide not to mention the Bigfoot I encountered. That would sound way too far-fetched. Most people can't get their heads around a ghost story, so bringing a Bigfoot into the equation is going a tad too far for the digestive juices of the deeply cynical person to assimilate. And given that I'm still coming to terms with what happened, I decide to wisely say nothing. Please, everyone, sit down, help yourself to some tea and snacks, and then, Neil, I'd be so thrilled if you would fill us in on all the details about what happened to Francesca Davies. Was it the husband who killed her, I ask?
"It was," said Officer Wilson, taking a bite of his chocolate brownie. "This is delicious, by the way."
"Thank you," I say.
"In many cases, especially like this, it is usually someone close to home responsible for the crime, and we always look at the husband first. The deceased woman, Francesca Davies, was bundled into a large tin drum by her husband, who had hidden all her clothes in bin bags. Even her SUV was parked in the storage unit. The coroner discovered that there was a single gunshot wound to the side of her head. The husband confessed to the murder of his wife. But given he had hired the storage unit, he couldn't point a finger at anyone else.
I suppose not, I say. I do admit that on the day he hired the unit from us, he did look particularly flustered.
It was one of those rather tragic cases, said Officer Wilson, shaking his head sadly. Mr. Davies was very upset. I almost felt sorry for the man. He was like any regular guy. I got the impression that he was in love with his wife, devastated by her death. In a strange way, he was heartily relieved to have been caught, as the burden of his guilt was weighing heavily on his heart and eating him alive. He was telling me he'd lost 40 kilos from all the stress. Yes, but why did he kill his wife? Eric asks. I mean, what makes a man shoot his wife in the head like that, at point-blank range? I mean, me and my wife, we have our rows from time to time, I will admit. But never ever in a million years would I lay a finger on her grey head. And believe me, that wife of mine can really wind me up at times.
Officer Wilson nods at Eric in agreement.
I agree. But working here in the force over the years, you encounter domestics where things have gone tragically too far. It seems both Francesca and her husband had agreed together to try for a baby when she was 35 years old. She had even had her eggs frozen on ice by the gynecologist so that they could access them at a later date. Mr. Davies said they discussed this in detail, but he discovered his wife's birth control pills in the main dustbin in the backyard, so he challenged her about it. She admitted that she had been throwing them out on purpose and confessed to being 2 months pregnant. Mr. Davies told us it wasn't the fact that his wife was pregnant that upset him, but the fact that she had perfidiously gone behind his back, throwing away the birth control pills without consulting him. I gather it was her traitorous deception that riled him up considerably. He felt he couldn't trust his wife. He said trust was everything to him in a relationship, so Francesca's duplicity very much aggrieved him. He said she grinned at him and said, "But we're having a baby now." And he said he just wanted to wipe the smug smile off his wife's face, so he grabbed the revolver and he shot his wife at point-blank range. And it was only once he'd shot her that he realised the gravity of what he'd done. He then panicked. "But I'm sorry," says Eric. "I fully understand why he was grievously upset. I would be too if my wife tricked me like that. But killing her? That was outrageous." "I agree," said Officer Wilson. "I gather he panicked. He packed up all her clothes, her car and her essential items, stuffed her body in a drum, hired a storage unit. He told everyone his wife had gone on a road trip. He wasn't sure when she would be back. His plan was to get rid of all the stuff in the storage unit and dispose of his wife's body. But he wanted to think about how to hide all the evidence, so the security unit was a good stopgap for him."
"And you're saying everybody just believed him?" I asked, "about his wife just going off on a road trip like that?"
"Well, it would seem so," said Detective Wilson. "You see, she'd been talking about taking a road trip for a very long time, so people just thought she up and left. She was quite spontaneous, I believe."
After Detective Wilson left, I was thrilled to put the pieces of the puzzle together, but I am amazed that it was a ghost of Francesca that drew our attention to Storage Unit 313, and a Bigfoot that alerted me to Francesca's ghost that needed my help. I'm glad to report that to date, both Bobby and Eric have not reported any untoward activity in our storage units. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I stare vacantly out of the kitchen window, my mind wandering 1,000 miles away, almost as if my thoughts have been hijacked by the startling news I've just received that has left me feeling more than a little discomposed and unhinged, for I'm not certain how this news could potentially impact our lives. I'm a creature of habit, set in my ways. I don't welcome change very easily, in any shape, way or form, for I am steadfastly consistent in everything I do. I always order the same tenderloin steak at the diner, and I've played golf every Sunday for the last 5 years consistently. It's raining cats and dogs out there. The rain is pouring down in buckets. It's dribbling down our glass pane on the floor-to-ceiling windows of the living room area, on the lower elevation of our symmetrical farmhouse, where me and my family have happily resided for the last 12 years. I never bemoaned or regretted moving to the countryside from the city. I've always been a person that cherishes nature, and it's over the weekends I get to appreciate living in the countryside, in such a rural abode, where I can relinquish all the online work that I've been doing during the week and take a ride on Stardust, my beautiful American quarter horse, down one of those hiking trails, and forget about the encumbrant responsibilities and contentious challenges that held me shackled to the chair in my office, subjugated or held captive, if you like, to the ceaseless piles of uncongenial work I'm expected to do during the week. I only take a trip to the main offices in central Seattle twice a week, so working from home is a huge bonus for me, and in any spare time I get, I thoroughly enjoy spending time with my 2 children, Reuben, who's 15, and Alexa, who's 12. When it rains here in Washington State, which is quite frequent, we're known for having fickle, capricious and vacillating weather that is changeable and unpredictable. You can quite literally have 4 seasons in one day, so you could potentially wear a jacket, a winter coat, a raincoat and a swimming costume in one day. Alexa always says that when it rains, someone out there is very sad. I think she might be right about that. I watch the rain dribbling down the glass pane. It really does reflect the inward turmoil that is jetting around my heart, like a washing machine in full cycle. I wouldn't mind being able to let go and cry sometimes, but my tear ducts are as dry and barren as the Sahara Desert. I wish I could clandestinely cry. It would be a release from the angst I'm feeling that is gathering up in my chest like storm clouds on a tempestuous day. The last time I cried was when my stepbrother Rodney locked me up in a barn for 2 days, when I was about 12 years old. It's been 20 years since I was estranged and alienated from my stepbrother, and now the news that he was found lying deceased in his home has hit me hard like a ton of bricks to the head. The coroner believes he died of a stroke. I've barely mentioned my stepbrother to my wife, as he's always been an ambivalent, pugnacious subject that I really wanted to avoid discussing, as the impassioned memories I have of him were not pleasant. My stepbrother was a dark, bellicose character, who was neither kind to man nor beast. I never thought I'd ever have to think about him again, but now he's come back into my life like the proverbial boomerang, in a manner of speaking. I gather my stepbrother has listed me as the next of kin for his 12-year-old daughter, whose mother is also deceased. I'm the only available relative who can take her into my charge, or the girl will be forced to go into foster care. I've agreed that the girl can come and live with us, but I haven't discussed this provocative, problematic issue with my own wife. In truth, I'm not certain how well she's going to take this inopportune, inexpedient news. Neither am I certain what it's going to be like, having a young girl Alexa's age moving into our home. I can only hope and pray she's not a chip off the old block, as that will be inviting grievous trouble into our lives that we can almost certainly well do without. When my wife comes through the kitchen door, she's carrying a large brown paper bag in her hands from the shopping. I can see her long brown hair is wet. She hasn't managed to escape the rain. The rest of the shopping is in the car. I'll bring it in later, she says, placing the brown paper bag onto the kitchen counter. She starts removing the groceries from the bag: a long baguette, a cooked chicken, a bottle of onion marmalade, some pre-cooked potato salad, some Greek salad, a bottle of French dressing, and a large piece of brie cheese. "What's wrong?" she says suddenly. "Your face has gone as white as a sheet." "Oh my God, what are you not telling me? Has something dreadful happened?" I watch my wife's face pale. "It's not my mother. Please don't tell me it's my mother. Has something happened to her? Oh my God, please no," she says, clasping her hand over her mouth. "Calm down, sweetheart. It's nothing like that, I say," taking a big sigh. "It's my stepbrother. He's dead." "You're talking about the stepbrother that was always getting into trouble with the law? The one that locked you up in the barn?" "The very same one.
I gather he died of a massive stroke.
My wife walks over to me. She cradles me lovingly in her arms. You poor, poor thing. I know that even though the two of you never got on, and you haven't been in touch for many years, it's certainly not easy to hear that a blood relative has died, regardless of how disconnected you may have been. It always comes as a shock.
Well, he had a 12-year-old daughter, I believe, called Michelle. He listed me as the next of kin. I told the social services that she could come and live with us.
You said what? Said my wife. But you know nothing about her. Supposing she's a dreadful influence on Alexa.
You can't just go and say that a random stranger can just move in with us willy-nilly. She's not a random stranger. You can't call her that. She is related to me by blood. We will cross that bridge when we come to it. I can't very well just toss the poor girl into the foster care system, can I? That would be a cruel thing to do.
Cheryl's account. I waited with bated breath as the taxi drew up outside our home, containing a passenger that I wasn't sure I would particularly like, so I felt a rising sense of trepidation. I knew Michelle had grown up in a less than agreeable environment. I gather her mother had died fortuitously in a car accident when she was only 7 years old. She was raised from thenceforth by her father for the last 5 years of her life, in a small apartment in Houston, by a father who was working as a carpenter, but was always engaged in underhand dealings. What kind of a daughter would my husband's half-brother have raised as a single father? I dreaded to think. I glanced out of the window as I saw a young girl getting out of the truck. I almost felt relieved to see that she didn't have 3 heads and a pair of fangs. She looked as normal as any other 12-year-old girl. The taxi driver pulled a suitcase out of the trunk of the car. That was when I felt tears welling up in the back of my eyes. Poor thing, I thought. Is that all she's got in the entire world? I could feel generous waves of empathetic compassion flooding over me, rather like a tsunami of solicitous commiseration, as I discerned this girl was all alone in the world, like a stray, abandoned, unloved dog on the street corner, who had no safe place to rest his weary head. I could hear the knock at the door. I quickly rushed forward to open it. A sweet-looking young girl was standing in the doorway. She had her pretty, shiny, long black hair swept back in a ponytail. She had translucent porcelain fair skin and very beguiling green eyes. "Do come in," I said. She gave me a warm smile. "I just want to say, Mrs. Burford, that I'm so grateful you're having me to stay. I was really scared that I was going to have to be carted off to a foster home. My father never told me I had an uncle and aunt and cousins, but I'm thankful you've taken me in. I truly appreciate your great kindness." Alexa's account. "You're going to share a bedroom with me," I told Michelle. "Mum says you can have a room of your own later on, when you're much more settled. She thinks that for the moment it'll be good for us to share a bedroom together for a while, so we can get to know each other better. I'm so glad you're here, because although I love my brother very much, he only wants to play boys' games like cowboys and Indians and stuff like that. It's nice to have another girl around the place." "I'll be glad of the company," said Michelle. "I've always imagined how good it would be to have a sister. Now it seems my wish has come true." I felt thrilled by her comments. She was describing me as a sister. It would be awesome, I thought, if we became close. "I'm sorry," I said, "about your dad dying. I say this looking awkward, but I know it needs to be said. Otherwise it's like ignoring and disregarding the gargantuan pink elephant in the room. I mean, what do you say to someone in a short space of time who's lost both of their parents? I feel so much empathy for her, for I couldn't envisage what it would feel like to lose both of my parents, as my family is absolutely everything to me. "If you must know, I'm very glad he's dead," she tells me. "He was a complete loser." I notice that Michelle's jaw tightens. I realise she's not melancholic, desolate, or even heartbroken that her dad has died, which strikes me as lugubriously doleful and very sad. "You know, when my mother was alive, she told me what a loser my dad was. I wasn't very happy when she died because I had to move in with my dad.
But then I suppose beggars can't be choosers, can they? And anything is better than ending up with social services tossing you from one foster home to another. It's rather like playing Russian roulette, isn't it? You never know what kind of family is going to be taking you on. It's better the devil you know, is it not? I suppose so, I say. If you don't mind me asking, why do you think your dad was such a loser? My dad didn't give a toss about me. He didn't care about anything I did. I suppose the one good thing about him was he gave me money, lots of it, to buy whatever I needed. But otherwise he pretty much ignored me the whole time. He came home every night. He'd get drunk as a skunk, and then in the morning he'd be sober again and go off to work. It was like he pigeonholed his life into separate compartments, if you know what I mean. He wasn't horrible to me, but being ignored makes you feel pretty lonely. Sometimes on a Saturday night he'd come back home from the bar and bring a sozzled woman home with him. And she would be so blooded, and the whole evening they'd be laughing and getting drunk together. I often went to stay at Lucy's house, she's my best friend, for the whole weekend. And you know what got me every time? My dad never even noticed that I'd been gone. That really hurt me a lot. But after a while I got used to being ignored. That's terrible, I said. My mother would always notice if I went missing, even for an hour. She'd be champing at the bit, she'd be so worried about me. Did your dad ever tell you he loved you? Are you for real? Said Michelle. Of course he never told me he loved me. What a strange question to ask. You are funny. If he ignores me all the time, I think love is pretty far from his mind, don't you? Love is a verb, is it not? It comes with actions, I think. Well, my parents tell me they love me all the time. But then do they really? Do they love you really? Asked Michelle. How do you know they're not making it up? I mean, that's what parents dutifully tell their children, that they love them. But they could be lying, could they not? I don't believe all parents really love their children. In fact, I doubt it a lot. I must confess I did thoroughly enjoy having Michelle staying with me in my bedroom, but there were controversial, ambiguous and contentious things about her that were different to other girls my own age, possibly due to the precarious, phlegmatic way she was raised, or the fact that she'd spent so much time on her own. I think she was suffering from repressed anger, as she had a hard, apathetic, stony-hearted, almost glacial side to her character, which was unemotional, detached and indifferent. I think she had hardwired herself to become ruthlessly impenetrable and rigidly austere, not allowing anything to ever hurt her, so she'd learnt to develop a tough rhino skin. I never saw her get dismayed about anything, nor did she so much as ever cry a stray tear. If we watched a sorrowful movie together that would invariably make me cry incessantly, she would have a disdainful, emotionless face, as if nothing that had transpired during the movie had moved her in the slightest. I noticed when people got murdered or killed on screen, her face would become animated and light up like a Christmas tree. She seemed to delight in all the grueling stuff. The biggest shock and revealing revelation came to me in my biology class, when we were each asked to dissect a live frog. Michelle killed her specimen with an ebullient enthusiasm and a zestful eagerness that was disturbingly unsettling. Even the teacher looked discomposed by how thrilling the killing game was to Michelle. I was very baffled when she jubilantly offered to kill everybody else's frogs. You see, no one wanted to kill their specimen. I love frogs and I didn't want to kill mine, so I clandestinely let it escape out of the back window of the classroom, so I had to share the dead specimen with the girl next to me. I cannot bear killing anything. I also noticed that Michelle had a shrewd maturity about her. She was much more worldly wise about life than the rest of us, but she was very popular and well liked by all the kids. The teachers described her as a model student, and even my parents seemed to warm to her considerably. But she was always very polite. I always felt as if she was winning people over by just acting charming. It was during the summer I saw an iniquitous, malicious side to Michelle that she concealed so superbly from everyone else. I became acquainted with the pernicious side of her personality. I began to realize that she really was a loathsome individual, a victim of her abusive, injurious background. I say abusive, as to grow up without love is almost certainly a form of abuse.
It all began during our summer holidays, when both me and Michelle were riding our bicycles down the country lane. The road in question is now lined with asphalt, but back in those days it was a large dust road that you could cycle on for miles, past undulating viridescent fields, meadows filled with black and white cows or frolicking horses, gravel pits, farmhouses, barns, and vast areas of resplendent verdant woodland. It was when we passed old Mrs. Minnie Quinn's cottage that I parked my bicycle against the white wicker fence. It had been ages since I'd last seen Minnie. She'd always been a grandmother-like figure in my life. I often went to speak to her about all kinds of stuff that I would never share with my mother. With her advancing years, she offered such sagacious advice, and she would often tell me wonderful stories about her younger days. She lived on her own in the cottage, but she used to tell me she had a hairy guardian angel watching over her. I thought that was her just being funny. She always felt safe. That's what she told me anyway. And for a 92-year-old woman, she was still able to take care of herself. "Who lives here?" asked Michelle curiously. "Mrs. Quinn," I said. "I call her Minnie. She's such a sweet old lady. She's 92. It'll be great to pop in and say hello." Michelle pouted. "Must we? I haven't got much time for old ladies." "That's because you've never had a grandmother-like figure in your life. Come on, Michelle. She's a lovely old lady. Let's go and say hello. I promise you'll really like her. She's ever so nice." Michelle looked like she was sulking. She didn't look convinced by my assurances, but she didn't argue with me, and promptly parked her bike outside the white wicker fence next to mine. I opened the cute white gate, and we walked down the cobblestone front path towards the dark black front door. I marvelled at the pretty beds filled with perennial flowers intermingled with roses that graced the front yard so vibrantly with colourful splashes of colour. I reached the brass horsehead knocker, rapping it a few times. "I'm coming! I'm coming!" I could hear a distant voice, and then a scuttling sound as Mrs. Quinn opened the door. It creaked open. I hadn't seen her for over 4 months, and in that time she'd aged considerably. But she was as sharp as ever, and her piercing blue eyes smiled warmly at us through the crinkled folds of her papery skin. She was wearing a tweed skirt, a white shirt, and a cameo brooch. "Oh, this is a lovely surprise, Alexa. Do please come in. Who is this lovely friend of yours?" "This is my half-cousin, Michelle. She's living with us now. Both her parents are actually dead." "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, dear," said Mrs. Quinn. "Why don't you come in, have some homemade lemonade and some chocolate chip cookies, unless, of course, you would prefer tea?" "Lemonade would be great," I said. "You know me, Minnie. I'll never say no to your chocolate chip cookies. They're the best in the world." "They are good," said Minnie. "I got the recipe from Martha Stewart a long time ago. I've never looked back, you know. Everyone loves those cookies." "She makes them for Christmas presents, don't you, Minnie?" "That's right, dear, I do. But this year the vicar's wife told me not to make any for her husband. She says he's gone up 3 pant sizes in 1 year. She thinks he's always coming here to eat my chocolate chip cookies," she chuckled. "And is the vicar coming around to eat your chocolate chip cookies, Minnie?" I asked, my eyes twinkling mischievously. "Yes, dear, he most certainly does come round rather regularly, every time his wife puts him on a diet." "Can't say I blame him, Minnie," I teased. "Your chocolate chip cookies, they're the best." We followed Mrs. Quinn into the kitchen. Her arthritic mottled hands struggled to pour the lemonade into large glass tumblers, and of course to put the cookies from the tin onto a plate. "Minnie, let me do that for you." "Oh, will you, dear? I'm much obliged. My arthritis is getting worse and worse these days." Minnie led us into the living room. We drank lemonade and ate our cookies. I could see Mrs. Quinn was grateful for the company. We chatted away for a long while about anything and nothing. I feel irritated with Michelle. She's rolling her eyes, yawning rudely, almost as if everything this effervescent, dynamic old woman is saying is boring, when nothing could be further from the truth. "I hope I'm like you when I'm your age, Mrs. Quinn. You're so active. I can't believe you're 92.
Well, it gets harder for me every year, dear. These days my bones are rattling. But I'm so happy living here in this cottage. I wouldn't have it any other way, you know. Mrs. Quinn collects our glasses, and I tell her to sit down. You sit down, Mrs. Quinn. I'll take the tray back to the kitchen for you, and I'll wash up the dishes. I amble off to the kitchen and begin to wash up the glasses and plates. That's very good of you, dear. I'll show Michelle my china collection. I placed the glasses and plates in the soapy suds, and I dried them with a tea cloth and placed them neatly in the cupboard. I'm certain I hear a loud, inauspicious thud, a crashing sound, but I don't hear any raised, upset voices, so I automatically assume that Mrs. Quinn was showing Michelle one of her china figurines, and possibly just smashed it accidentally due to her arthritis. I continue to put away the clean plates and glasses. All done, Mrs. Quinn, you'll be glad to know, I say, walking back into the living room. But I see Mrs. Quinn. She's lying on the floor. There's blood running down her skull. She's lying there motionless, and when I reach down to examine her pulse, I realise she's dead. Her eyes are glazed over like a dead fish. What have you done? You hurt my friend. What have you done? Oh, she's just a stupid old lady, says Michelle. Get over yourself, Alexa. What did you do? You killed my friend. Tears are pouring down my face. Then I hear a crashing sound at the window. I look up to see an obscure hazy figure watching us. He's witnessed everything that has transpired through the living room window. This massive human-like face is staring at us judiciously through its deep-set treacle-coloured eyes, smudging its flat nose against the glass pane. It appears to be trying to look inside the living room. I can see by the pyramid-shaped head and the leathery grey skin on the face that this creature is definitely a Bigfoot. This intimidating, lofty, majestic creature looks terrifying in every way. Michelle takes one look at the creature and screams, "Run! Run!" I don't need much encouraging. My heart is pounding violently in my chest. My blood is coursing through my veins as I dash through the front door, down the stone path, out the white wicker gate, as fast as I can. But I briefly look up. I can see this huge Bigfoot literally taking up Mrs. Quinn's entire living room because he's so large. He's looking down in horror at her motionless body. He lets out a discomposing roar that reverberates through my entire body, making me shudder all over. He sounds like he's distressed and aggrieved by her death, almost as if he's personally known her in life. I can hear the sorrowful notes in his cry. I quickly retrieve my bicycle from the side of the white wicker fence and scramble onto the seat, pressing my feet down on the pedals and riding quickly down the dust road as fast as I possibly can, with Michelle cycling behind me. I glance back to see the Bigfoot standing in the middle of the road, watching us cycling away. He doesn't even try to chase after us. When me and Michelle arrive back at the home, truly all words are confiscated from me by the level of shock that I'm experiencing. I just cannot believe what has transpired. Not only have I just seen a Bigfoot, but my profane half-cousin has sacrilegiously, willfully killed my very good old friend. Michelle looks at me with a black-hearted darkness in her eyes that frightens me. You don't tell anyone what happened. You hear me? Or you're dead. She makes the sign of slitting my throat. I realise that Michelle is clearly not right in the head, and that coming from such a broken home has given her a narcissistic type of personality. But her threats frighten me, for I realise that she is literally capable of anything. Why? I ask her. Why did you harm a sweet little old lady? It's called being merciful, says Michelle. That's why people euthanize pets when they get old. I was sparing her all the anguish of getting older. She's 92, for goodness sake. She's had a good innings. But she was perfectly happy with her life until you fortuitously brought it to an end. She needed to go. It was her time. But if you breathe a word about this to your parents, you're dead. I think that Bigfoot saw everything you did. I think he knows you killed her. I think that Bigfoot must have known Mrs. Quinn. He seemed so grievously sad that she was dead. Boo-hoo! For the Bigfoot. I'm so sad for him. A great big hairy monstrous beast. Until now, I didn't even think those things were real. But what can he do? Nothing. Besides, I doubt those things are very intelligent. Maybe the silly old bat gave him chocolate chip cookies, lemonade to drink, and he's all upset because he ain't going to be getting any more. I sensed he was clearly upset by what you did. I thought he was going to attack us. So did I, admitted Michelle. I've never been so scared in all my life. But he didn't attack us, did he? So everything is hunky-dory. As long as you don't breathe a word, because if I go down, I'm taking you down with me. I'll tell everyone you wanted to harm her. And it wasn't me, it was you who did it. But everyone knows I love Minnie, that I'd never ever harm her. I don't even know how you killed her. I hit her over the head with the fire poker. Her eyes rolled in the back of her head. She fell over backwards and was gone like that. She didn't even feel a thing. It was like swatting a fly. You really are evil, Michelle. You murdered poor Mrs. Quinn. How can you talk about her with such disregard? One day you'll be an old lady. How would you like it if someone swatted you like that? I will not deny the fact that I was now terrified of Michelle, but I knew if I breathed a word about what had happened to poor Minnie, that Michelle would not hesitate to bring me down with her. I so wanted to run to my mother and to tell her everything, but I was too afraid of the repercussions and also concerned that some locals may have seen our bicycles outside Minnie's cottage, and potentially we could be taken in for questioning by the police. It was at dinner the following evening, when my mother was piling mashed potatoes and sausages on our plates, that she said, "I've got some very sad news to have to tell you all. I know you're going to be particularly upset, Alexa, as you were desperately fond of Minnie, but I'm afraid she was found dead in her cottage this morning by the postman, who noticed the front door half open. He grew very concerned. He found her lying dead in the living room. He was very distressed." I tried to act surprised. "Oh, that's terrible, Mum. What happened?" "Well, the police are investigating the crime. The coroner says she was hit over the head with a sharp instrument, so she didn't die of natural causes. It seems that she was murdered." "Oh, my God," said Michelle. "Who would want to hurt the poor frail old woman? I met her once. She was so nice. We really liked her, didn't we, Alexa?" I couldn't believe that my half-cousin, responsible for Minnie's death, was acting like she actually cared about the woman. "I know, it is quite frightful to even contemplate," said my mother. "It is rather bizarre, to say the least. It seems that the perpetrator was remorseful about what he or she had done, as Minnie's body was found lying on heaps and heaps of straw in the middle of the living room, while many of the flowers from her yard were found prettily arranged around her body. So the police believe it was someone who she knew personally that perpetrated the crime. And then in a moment of remorse, they arranged her body in an extraordinary way. They even put the flowers in her hair. I gather her daughter says the ruby ring on her hand has been stolen, along with a string of pearls she always wears. I gather her daughter told the police that Mrs. Quinn had recently been diagnosed with breast cancer and was given less than a year to live." "So poor Minnie was killed for a string of pearls and a ruby ring," my father says. "And then they arrange her body on barrels of straw and decorate her body with flowers. I will admit that is exceedingly bizarre. So the perpetrator suddenly feels a wee bit remorseful. What a dreadful thing to do to a poor old lady." "It would seem so," said my mother. "It is desperately sad." From what I gather, there's crime scene tape all over the cottage, but the postman thinks the police aren't going to find much DNA. There's mud trailed all over the carpet in the living room. I think with bringing all those flowers and straw into the house, it really got to be quite a mess. Who goes and kills a lovely old lady like that? They have to be duplicitously evil. It would seem that after poor Mrs. Quinn's death, the police investigation drew to a close. I must admit I was hugely relieved about it. I knew if me and Michelle were brought in for questioning, if anyone had seen us leaving the premises, Michelle wouldn't hesitate to pin all the blame on me. She was guilefully duplicitous like that, and very persuasive, so I knew I needed to keep my eyes on her. I kept up the pretense of being good friends with her, as I was desperately afraid if I did not, me or a member of the family could be seriously hurt. One day, me, Michelle, and my brother went for a hike in the woodgrove. The hiking trail was accessed close to old Mrs. Quinn's cottage that had been recently sold and purchased by another old lady, who chose to put up a security system inside her cottage based on what had happened to Minnie. I understand she told my mother, "You can never be sure these days what kind of wackos are out there." And my mother had wholeheartedly agreed, being blindly oblivious that the weirdo in question was actually living under our own roof. I do remember it was a beautiful summer's day. It was the school holidays for us, a whole year after Mrs. Quinn's tragic demise. Every time I mentioned the subject to Michelle, she would scoff and say that she had done the old woman a favour, as the old lady was going to die of cancer anyway, and she had put her out of her misery. Do you know how much suffering people go through when they have cancer? They have to take morphine and all kinds of pain meds. I've eliminated all that for her, have I not? I told you it was a mercy killing. You didn't know she had cancer when you killed her, I reminded her. There was nothing merciful about what you did. If you've forgotten you killed her in cold blood, you're not God. You don't decide who lives or dies. Michelle scoffed. Don't dredge all this up again, Alexa. It's getting terribly boring. We were riding our bicycles down the long, rugged country lane. My brother suggested we took a walk down the old abandoned woodland trail that was no longer accessed by the locals, based on the fact that a better trail had been recently prepared. This was the old trail people frequented in the 1950s, he told us. I've never been this way before, but I think it should be great fun. The three of us were hesitant, but our naturally adventurous, inquisitive natures punctured our reluctance, rather like a beach ball that was soon deflated by our zestful enthusiasm. It was an easily accessible trail, which was rather bewildering, given it was no longer actively in use. How could this be? Would you not expect it to be overgrown? On the contrary, it looked as though someone had been fastidiously maintaining the trails over many years, as there was no estranged saplings ensnared under a large tree, nor were there rambunctious overgrown brambles or shrubbery, greedily spreading out their leafy abundance to run wildly over the woodgrove like out-of-control weeds. It would seem everything was in perfect sequence and coordination, like the musical notes in a hymn. All the tall, imposing trees that peppered this woodgrove were spectacularly spaced out, while the fauna and flora dappled the forest floor with a viridescent splendour that coordinated seamlessly, as if everything had been fastidiously mapped out with a perfect precision, as it all had its place. There was no doubt in my mind that this forest was more transfixing than the normal woodland trails we regularly frequented. It was like we had stumbled on a secret magical place, as the entrance to this woodland sanctuary was so overgrown. It gave you the false, misleading impression that if you ventured any deeper into this dense savane, you would need a machete to break your way through the shrubbery. But this was not the case. So maybe the authorities had been keeping it ship-shape for many years, and were blindly oblivious or unaware that it was no longer in use. A gentle breeze began to filter through the woods, charging it with a revitalizing, cool, energizing air, while the tall, imposing ponderosa pines and Douglas firs jiggled their needled boughs, swaying gently in the breeze, like elegant ladies waving their hands. The vast canopy above our heads permitted a select measure of light to enter this enticing sylvan, sprinkling it with a refined gossamer light. We could hear the vibrant orchestra of the birds, filling the forest with warbles, tweets, and trills. We surprised a plethora of woodland animals, most especially deer and rabbits, that seemed startled by our appearance, which certainly affirmed to me that this pathway was barely ever accessed by any of the locals. In a trice, the forest changed. The transformation was dramatic, instantaneous. It was as if in a second every bird had ceased to sing, almost as if the conductor of this illustrious feathery orchestra had commanded silence. Everything became ominously quiet. It was an inauspicious, portentous silence, steeped with a menacing impression that veiled the forest in an oppressive, gloomy, heavy carpet of foreboding,
that was so tangible you could almost feel it. The temperature in the forest plummeted. It shifted from being pleasantly warm to really rather chilly. If that wasn't bad enough, we got the terrible sense that we weren't alone, that invisible eyes were searing into our flesh like burning hot coals. "Something is looking at us. I can feel eyes on us," I insisted. "Oh, don't be such a silly big baby, Alexa. Nothing is watching us. Get a grip, girl."
"I feel it too," said my brother. "Alexa is not imagining things. Something is definitely watching us."
"Not you too," said Michelle. "The problem is the two of you have overactive imaginations. If anything is looking at us, it's possibly a deer hiding behind a bush." I knew there was no point in arguing with Michelle, so we trudged forward into the forest. But as we moved forwards, we could hear something was following us. You could hear that whoever or whatever it was had a very heavy footfall. It was now Michelle's turn to look anxious.
"I think I hear something. Something's following us with big feet."
Her face paled.
"I think we should go back. Something feels off."
We turned around and glimpsed this dark, shadowy being moving through the trees. We could see glimpses of black through the branches, and then we heard a grunting sound.
"What the hell is that?" said my brother,
who was beginning to freak out. His voice sounded like it was quivering with anxiety. "I think it might be a Bigfoot," I said. "Me and Michelle, we've seen one before." Before my brother could even react, the Bigfoot emerged through the trees, and the only way I can describe him to you was that I felt we were in the presence of something very majestic. The creature was all male, about 8 foot tall, 700 pounds, covered in long, dark, black flowing hair, with a human-like face, and the kindest deep-set eyes that I've ever seen. I could see my brother was trembling. He was terrified by the intimidating size and formidable, daunting presence of this creature, while Michelle was shaking like a leaf. But for some reason, I remained stoically calm, as I sensed this intelligent creature meant us no harm. The creature was standing yards away from us. His eyes darted from me to my brother, and then to Michelle. But when he saw Michelle, he pointed at her, pulled back his lips, and growled. I knew at once that this was the Bigfoot we had witnessed that day in Millie's house, and he had beheld what had happened that day. He knew Michelle was responsible for murdering Millie. He was pointing his hands at Michelle. I don't know if he was speaking to her in her mind, because Michelle was saying, "I didn't mean to. It was just an accident." She looked petrified, her eyes growing as round as saucers. The Bigfoot glided towards her. He lashed Michelle across the head with his hand. In a trice she fell backwards on the forest floor. I realized at once she was dead. It was almost as if the Bigfoot had hit her in precisely the same spot as she had hit Millie. I'm not sure why me and my brother did not run away, but the Bigfoot looked up at us with bright warm eyes, nodded at us, and then glided away.
"Did you see that?" said my brother. "Did you hear that?"
"Hear what?" I asked him.
"I think the Bigfoot spoke to me in my head. He said, 'Now justice has been executed.'"
"What's that supposed to mean?" My brother ran over to Michelle and looked up at me in horror, telling me what I already knew.
"Michelle is dead! Oh my God! The Bigfoot killed her! Why would he do such a dreadful thing? He didn't seem like a mean fellow to me. It doesn't make any sense. He didn't even touch us. Why did he single her out like that?"
"Maybe he saw something in her that was dark," I suggested.
"Sis," said my brother, "you do realize we cannot tell anyone about the Bigfoot we've seen. Do you understand that? It's very important. If we mention the creature to anyone, we will be the laughing stock of everyone in town. No one will believe us."
"Well, what about Michelle? How will we explain her death?" I asked him.
"We will say we were walking ahead of her on the woodland trail. We heard a thump and turned around to find her dead."
To cut a long story short, I felt a monumental relief that Michelle was no longer living with us. It was hard to grieve her loss after I'd seen what she had done to Minnie. I knew she wasn't a good person. I lived my life in fear and trepidation, and now she was gone. The solace and succour I felt was immense. I was able to share my story with my parents. We realized that Michelle was so messed up, a victim of her tempestuous childhood. She was filled with such a repugnant, abhorrent anger that she could easily express violently. My mother believes that later on in life she could have potentially done greater harm. I believe the Bigfoot recognized Michelle as the girl who'd killed Millie. Perhaps he was determined to execute justice on Minnie's behalf, but perhaps he also saw within her the potential for executing even greater obnoxious, invidious evil. Perhaps he was determined to destroy the objectionable blackness he saw in her heart. I really believe he had a prodigious, remarkable friendship with the old woman. She had always told me she had a guardian angel watching over her, and a hairy one at that. Could it be that she was referring to her Bigfoot friend? I think that more than likely. I know it was this wondrous, bodacious and commanding Bigfoot whom had arranged Millie's deceased body on a bed of straw, and decorated her so prettily with flowers from her yard. It was interesting that the Bigfoot had hit Michelle on exactly the same area on her head that she had hit Millie, and I believe that was intentional. Some people would describe that as karma, and I think they may be right about that. I bagged up Michelle's clothes to send to the thrift store. Then I found the ruby ring and pearls in her wardrobe that she had stolen from Minnie, so I promptly posted them to Minnie's daughter, anonymously, and after that my family were once again united in love. And with Michelle out of the way, we thrived and blossomed, and life thankfully returned to normal. The world is an infinitely nicer place when evil is destroyed. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.